Guys ready? Good afternoon and welcome to the Glendale City Council Workshop Session of February 23rd, 2021. The meeting is called to order. I will now conduct an attendance roll call. Please signify by saying present. Councilmember Aldama.
Present.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Malnar.
Present.
Councilmember Tomachoff.
Here.
Councilmember Turner sent me a text. He's going to be a few minutes late. I'm here. The Vice Mayor and Mayor Wires is excused. Be aware that item 2 has been pulled by staff and will be placed on the March 9th agenda. Ms. Bowers, would you please introduce item 1?
Fiscal year 1920 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report and Annual Audit.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, good afternoon. Here to make the presentation today will be our Budget and Finance Director, Lisette Camacho. She's joined by Dennis Osich and Yan Fang, of Clifton, Larson, and Allen.
Good afternoon, Vice Mayor, members of the council. I'd like to introduce Ms. Rebecca Chitwood to my right, and Mr. Osach is right next to her. They'll be leading the presentation today, but before I turn over the presentation to them, I'd like to point out that in your packet, you have the comprehensive annual financial report and also a copy of the single audit. With that, I'll turn over the presentation to Ms. Chitwood.
Good afternoon. So the financial statement audit requirements. I didn't know if okay. So it is required by city code. It is also required by Arizona revised statutes. We also, it's required as disclosure for our bonds, and also the CFR, the Code of Federal Registers, to receive federal grant awards. So to prepare for our audit each year, we receive a list from our auditors of things that they're going to be reviewing. We stay up to date with our accounting standards, so staff and I attend trainings throughout the year to stay current with governmental accounting standards, and we assess changes in activities. So we review dollars and accounts to see if there's any high or lows, and if so, we review those. We also develop the timeline and assign work to not just to our accounting staff, but also to the departments. And when the auditors come in for preliminary field work, they will meet with city staff and departments to review the controls within the departments of the city. And so we'll schedule with the external departments to make sure that they're ready for when the auditors come in. Once we gather the list of items that the auditors are looking for, we review that before we turn it over to them. And then we will schedule final field work with auditors, and we set weeks aside, and we make sure that all staff is in office and ready to answer any questions they may have. They will pull various transactions on their 3 weeks in the office with us, and several questions and answers to make sure that they are fully aware of what they're looking for and that we've provided everything that they need. And as the audit wraps up, they will respond back to us with things, areas for opportunities and process improvements that we can look at for the next year. And with that, I will turn it over to Dennis Osich with Clifton, Larson, Allen to go over some of the things that they look for when they're on site.
All right. Well, thank you for having me here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of just the overall audit process, and then I've got Ann Fang with us. She was the director on the engagement. And she'll go a little bit more in detail on some of the reports that you have in front of you, and as we'll both be here to answer any questions that you might have as well. So really, the audit that we perform, what we're doing is we're giving reasonable assurance that the financial statements are reported in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So what does that mean when we say reasonable assurance? So we can't test 100% of the transactions within the city. It just wouldn't be feasible, and it wouldn't be cost effective whatsoever. So when we do the audit on a risk-based approach, which I'll talk a little bit about on the next slide. But we do a risk-based approach on the audit to provide that reasonable assurance on the financial statements. The other objective is so that we can actually provide an opinion. And what we're doing is we're giving an opinion that the financial statements are reported in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So the opinion, again, like I said, we're giving reasonable assurance on the financial statements. And then the other thing that we do is we provide any type of findings or recommendations. There's different levels of findings and recommendations that we provide. Some of those may be verbal to management, where we just see that there might be opportunities for efficiency within the audit or within the accounting system. We may provide a written management letter to management. These would be items where we felt it was important that they get addressed for future years, but weren't significant enough where we felt like it had to be brought to the attention of council. And then we get into more of the items where we feel it's important to bring it to council. They would be material weaknesses. These would be items where it caused a material misstatement of the financial statements that had to be corrected, or we felt like the internal controls, that there was a control deficiency significant enough that it could cause a material misstatement of the financial statements. And then the other category is a significant deficiency. These are items where we don't necessarily think that it could cause a material misstatement or that it did cause a material misstatement, but at least significant enough that we should bring attention to council. And again, Ann will go over some of those items as well in her portion of the presentation. So as I mentioned, we're giving reasonable assurance on the financial statements, so we take a risk-based approach. Every single organization has risks in their organization. They're just different at different organizations. And so what we do is, based on gaining an understanding of your organization, looking at what the internal control structures are, looking at how it's organized, we identify where some of those risks might occur, where a misstatement could occur, and we perform additional procedures in those areas to give us a level of assurance that the financial statements are reasonably stated. For those other areas where we may not assess a higher risk, it doesn't mean that we don't look at those areas, but we do perform other procedures, more basic procedures. Some of those would be analytics. We also use some of our data analytics where we are able to test 100% of the population for certain areas as well. So some of the factors that we look at in gaining an understanding, we do it through inquiry, but we can't base our audit solely on inquiry. So we also do it based on observation, some of our prior experience performing the audit. So if we noted that there were control deficiencies in prior years, those might be identified as higher risk areas. We also test controls. And so based on the operation of those controls, we're able to assess the risk in those areas and identify how much more we need to look at within the organization for some of those audit areas. And then we just use other factors. If there are certain account balances or assertions that might have more public scrutiny, those would be areas that we would assess as higher risk then as well. So I'll just run through the audit process real quickly. So basically the first step is just getting the signed engagement letter, and then we do our audit planning. And this is a little bit what Rebecca had talked about in the audit planning, is that we do our end of the audit planning as well as the city does theirs, but our planning is mostly based on looking at where the risks are and how we need to design our procedures. And then we provide a list of items that we need to the client so that they can prepare for the audit, and that's what Rebecca had gone over. And then we'll do some of our audit communication with governance as well as management. So I know some of you on the council here had interviews with some of our staff people where we did some of our fraud inquiries, and also opened it up for any questions that you had with our team. So we do that as part of our planning phase and getting an understanding of the organization. And then at that point, we do our audit field work. And so this is where we perform a majority of our procedures. We'll do our test of controls, our test of compliance over some of the major federal programs, and then confirm and detail test some of the account balances. And then finally, the last step is really issuing the reports and communicating the results of those reports to governance, because ultimately, even though we work with management, on a day-to-day basis when we're out in the field, ultimately we're responsible to governance, and so we're here to report those results to you. So within your reporting package, what you should have in front of you, as Lizette had mentioned, is the comprehensive annual financial report. There is a letter with communication to governance, which is basically all of the information that I'm covering here today, but it's in written form that you have as well. And then the single audit report, And then the independent accountant's report on the highway user revenue funds. The landfill assurance report we recently issued. And then if we had any type of management letter, then that would be issued as well. The annual expenditure limitation report, that has not yet been issued yet. We have that going through our final review process. Can't give an opinion on it yet, but I can tell you that, based on our initial testing that we've done, and we're almost there as far as issuing it, that we expect that a clean opinion will be issued on that report. So I just wanted to report that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ann at this point. She's going to go over some of the reports that you do have in front of you. Again, she was the director on the engagement, so she'll get into a little more detail on some of those reports.
Can you hear me? Oh, yeah. Thank you. So I'm going to go over the various reports that we have issued based on our audit work. The first up is the auditor's report on the comprehensive annual financial report, which is the big document sitting in front of you if you have it. So this report includes the city's financial record for fiscal year 20. This includes the government-wide statements that has the debt, capital assets, pension liability information that are normally not on your fund statements. And we also provide opinions on the notes related to these financial statements. So we provided an unmodified, which is the clean opinions on the comprehensive annual financial report. We also provided two in relations to opinions, and these are on the combining and individual fund statements, and also the federal data schedule. This schedule is submitted to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and this is reporting on your housing department information. We do not issue an opinion on other supplementary informations to the reporting package. So the second report, the auditor report we issue, is on the single audit. And the single audit is basically where we present all the federal grant information. Single audit is required if the city spent more than $750,000 during the year. And this year, in fiscal year 20, the city has spent approximately $46 million. And we have picked two major programs for review. One is the Community Development Block Grant. I'm sort of jumping around a little bit. And this was $1.6 million in expenditure. The second program we reviewed was the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and that was approximately $20 million. So in all, we reviewed 47% of your federal grant expenditures during the year. And I'm happy to review, we did not find any non-compliance issues or any internal control issues related to these grant programs. And that's kind of where we issue our auditor's report on internal control over financial reporting and other matters. Also, our report on compliance of each major federal programs and the internal control over the compliance. And on the schedule of expenditures of federal award.
Vice Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Aldama.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Question, the mic may have hiccuped a little bit, but you mentioned $46 million. Can you go back, just tell me what that $46 million was? I just heard the number.
Yeah, it's made up of various of different grants, and I believe the city reported about 75 grants during the year. So if you have a single audit package in front of you, there is a schedule that lists out all the grants of what the city spent this year.
So the $46 million, I assume, is grants?
Grants, federal
got
grants.
it. Okay, that's all I need. Thank you so much. Thank
No
you, Vice
problem.
Mayor.
Welcome.
So based on these reports, the internal control over financial reporting is it's based on what we call audited governmental auditing standard. The second one is based on the uniform grant guidance. So, like I said, there were no issues over the major programs, the federal major programs. However, On the internal controls over financial reporting, we did report one significant deficiency on internal control. Like Dennis said, we did not consider these to be major or significant. It's just that something we felt like the city needs to be aware of. So on this slide, I basically already went over it. We did cover 47% of the federal grant. We audited 2 major programs that are considered significant. There were no, well, we issued both unmodified opinions, and there were no non-compliance issues noted. So the rest of the other auditors' report that we have looked at, one is the highway user revenue funds. This is done and to ensure that the city has spent the money based on the federal regulation. The second one on landfill assurance, this is an agreed upon procedures which we follow the federal regulations and make sure that the city has complied as well. There were no findings on both reports. The last one to be issued is on the annual expenditure limitation report. And this will be issued possibly by the end of the month. And I'm happy to say that there were no findings as well. So this will conclude my presentation and open for any questions.
Thank you. Council members, do you have any questions, comments, recommendations?
Yes, Vice Mayor.
Council member?
I would just like to confirm and make sure that I took down the reports that were audited. There was CAFR, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. Then there were single audits on CDBG and coronavirus relief. The third audit was of the HERF, highway user. Fourth was landfill assurance, and fifth was annual expenditure limitation. Is
That's
that
correct.
correct? Those are the 5 reports that your firm did during the course of this year.
Yeah, that's correct. The agreed upon procedures is not an audit, it's just an agreed upon procedure, so we don't give an opinion. But if we had any findings, we would report findings related to that. But yeah, that's correct. And then the last one that we have to finish up is there's an electronic certification with HUD that needs to be done. Basically what it is it's an agreed upon procedures, and all we're doing is we're saying that the electronic submission agrees with the information that's included in the comprehensive annual financial report.
Okay, I have one follow-up question.
Okay.
We have an audit committee that assigns projects during the course of the year, but I just heard that these were not basically audits. They were, what would you call them?
No, these are audits. So the comprehensive annual financial report is an audit of the financial statements.
Okay,
And then the single audit is an audit of the major federal programs.
so there were 5 audits done by the audit committee that the audit committee oversaw during the past year.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, the external audit or the audit of the financial statements, the comprehensive annual financial report, the single audit, and the report on the highway user revenue funds, the landfill assurance, and then the annual expenditure limitation report are excluded from the audits that the audit committee oversees. Those are internal audits.
Okay. Do you happen to know what internal audits were performed this year, Ms. Camacho?
Vice Mayor, members of the council, for this year, I can name 2 because Budget and Finance were a part of the audit, and that's a vendor management audit, capital asset audit. I believe there was also a payroll audit, but I can certainly send you a list of all the audits that were done this fiscal year.
Thank you very much.
Councilmember Tomachow?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I just have a question on the, under government auditing standards. Can you confirm what the significant deficiency was? It
Yeah,
says
so
no
that-
material weaknesses, 1 significant deficiency.
Correct. Yeah, the significant deficiency related to a revenue accrual that was not done at or near year end. It wasn't a material amount, but it was a revenue that wasn't accrued at year end. I believe it was related to the casino. this, some of the casino revenue. It was an intergovernmental agreement, I think, that was out there.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, the revenue is related to the Tohono O'odham settlement agreement.
If I may, Vice Mayor,
Please.
just to explain a little bit, what that is saying is that those revenues came in after June 30th, but they related to the prior period, and they needed to be accrued back to the prior period. And so that was caught during the audit process, and then that was recorded properly. But it is this deficiency because it wasn't originally done that way. The auditors caught it, and it was done subsequently.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Councilmember Maldama?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Let me get back, my page closed here. Under Government Auditing Standards Report, you don't provide an opinion on internal controls. Rather, you provide an opinion on the deficiencies. My concern with that is that you provide an opinion of deficiencies that may have been caused by a lack of controls. So who in our staff monitors controls if the auditor doesn't do that? Can somebody help with that?
Yeah, so real quickly, let me just clarify that. So the Government Auditing Standards Report, we don't issue any opinion, but we just report on controls. So if we identified a control deficiency, we would report that. But within management, and Lizette or Rebecca can speak more to it, they do have design control procedures. It's not uncommon that at times during the year, especially for a city this size, that there may be a lapse in control from time to time. And so that's all that we're reporting, is that we identified a lapse in that control. So the finding that we had isn't indicating that there's no control in place. This was just an instance where there was a lapse in that control.
Thank you for that. And so obviously there's a bunch of controls in place to prevent any deficiencies. So I'm not asking for that to be an additional report that we want our city manager to bring to us, but who manages that? Is that Ms. Rios, you and your team?
Vice Mayor, members of the council, yes, it's primarily the responsibility of Budget and Finance to set up those controls and ensure that they are being followed.
Thank you. That's clarity. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Any other questions? I think we're fine then.
Thank you.
Welcome. Councilmember Turner, item 2 has been pulled. So, Ms. Bowers, would you please introduce item 3?
Downtown Cafe Lighting Project Update.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, here to provide staff report is our Director of Community Services, Jean Marino.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. We're happy to be here before you to provide an update on the Downtown Cafe Lighting Project. Joining me today is our design consultant, Mr. Mark Greenewald from Creative Designs and Lighting. He will be talking a little bit more about the work that he has done to advance this project. So as you'll recall, we met with Council back in September to talk about this project. After we met with Council, we made a determination that we wanted to hire a professional lighting design consultant, which is why we have engaged with Creative Design and Lighting. This particular project, you'll recall when we first spoke about it, and I'll talk about it in detail about the different phases of the project, but each phase of the project also has specific components, including architectural design, electrical engineering, and structural engineering as well. So what we're going to be talking about today is specifically phase 1 of this project, and specifically the architectural design. So at the end of today's presentation, we'll be looking for consensus direction from the council to approve the architectural design for phase 1, which Mr. Greenewald will show you in detail. We will be looking for some direction from council to consider the color changing technology option That is new. It's not something we had previously discussed with the council. And then discussion on a slight increase to the project budget, which will allow us the flexibility to continue moving this project forward through construction with the goal of not having to come back to council to address any unexpected issues that we might encounter as we get into the structural and electrical engineering portions of the project. So just as a quick reminder, this is a multi-departmental project. It requires a lot of work and energy. I'd like to especially thank the engineering department who has helped us in terms of identifying consultants. And special thanks to Mr. Jack Friedline, who is going to help us ensure that this project gets moving forward. And then obviously the transportation department, who will ultimately be the owner, economic development, and then field operations as well. So the original budget for this project was $185,000 that was authorized by council last September, and we will be utilizing community development block grant funding. It is an eligible use for this project. The phase one of this project, in the direction provided by council previously, was to move forward with constructing this design or this lighting project between 58th Drive and 58th Avenue along Glendale Avenue, and to obtain cost estimates for potential future phases, which are also shown here, 2 separate legs, one continuing east on Glendale Avenue, and then one potentially headed north from Glendale Avenue to Glen Drive. And then again, we selected Mr. Greenewalt's firm to help us with the design of this project. So the scope of work that Mr. Greenewalt has been working on with us diligently for the last several months was assessing the existing conditions, which he'll talk about in detail, making a recommended layout for how we could construct this project, and then recommending specific equipment that we could use, which is one of the reasons why we arrived at this option for some potential color-changing technology, which we do feel will be a value-added benefit. So the deliverables for this portion of the contract, and again, this is the architectural design and equipment recommendations, was to come up with the recommendations and present that to the council, provide very specific information regarding the equipment we could utilize, a site plan, and then ultimately an opinion of probable costs, which is one of the other reasons why we needed to get in front of council today, because we wanted to talk about a slight increase to that project budget. So with that, I will turn the rest of the presentation over to Mr. Greenewalt, and then I will wrap up at the end to seek consensus direction from the council.
Thank you. Mayor and Council, pleased to be here and present this fun project. This first slide shows kind of a little rendering of what it might look like. So this is actually your downtown, and showing some of the festoon lighting going over there. Cafe lighting, festoon has several names. Let's see, what am I hitting here? Okay. So in getting started, the project considerations, we already had an understanding that it was the desire for Glendale to add this, but just some reasons for this is it adds a sense of arrival to your downtown. It's the festoon lighting is something that everyone's familiar with. Some people in their backyard, some restaurants. Cities have adopted it quite often to give more of a vibrant retail downtown feel. The city of Scottsdale has it in their arts district, and the Tempe Mill Avenue Bridge is a good example. So it definitely gives a sense of festive and welcoming character to a place. As we started looking into this, we wanted to obviously keep the budget in mind and look at the existing character of what the downtown has to offer. Other considerations that were made, obviously we need to go from, the stringer lights need to be mounted on something. Sometimes you have buildings to mount that, sometimes it's poles. So we wanted to look at what our existing conditions were. And then first and foremost too is to consider safety and the traffic safety involved. So in getting started with assessing the existing conditions, obviously the first thing was to look at the distances that we had to work with. As a rule of thumb, 100 foot is about as long as you want to run the messenger wire and the extension wire to hang off of. Within reason, you can go over that a little bit, but we ended up having on the order of 70, almost 75 foot straight across at the widest points, which included the parking areas and the 4 lanes of traffic, and then some points that were smaller on the order of 50 foot that was between curb to curb. At an angle, for going across, 78 foot seemed to be the number we were dealing with, so we were within reason to move forward with it being plausible. The existing pole heights there are 30 foot for the street lighting, and then there's also the pedestrian scale poles that are much smaller that we'll look at in the next slide. Let's see. There's traffic poles also. We opted not to use any of the traffic poles that have signal lights on them. The information that we gathered was from 1994 as-built, and then we've site verified most of the information that we needed for dimensions. Assessing the existing character, we looked at all of the, first of all, the color scheme that's down there, and it's all the black wrought iron look. There were poles that had fluted design, and then the street lights were more of a linear pole that's the 30 foot with the mast arm that comes out. So as mentioned before, the pedestrian scale poles are not tall enough. You need the lights that go over the road to be at least 16 foot tall, and it's not attainable from the pedestrian scale poles, and also aesthetically would not have looked right since they have a post-top light source. So the one question was, would it be interesting to come up with a new pole design? And we threw a few ideas out, but as we looked at most of the ideas, one was budget. To maintain the budget, we wanted to stay with something that maybe was more in character with what's existing, and also maintainable. The existing streetlights are something that are stocked, and something that if a car were to hit them, they are definitely easier to replace those because of them being the standard. So the option, after considering all the different options available, was to use the existing street light. The goal would have been to use existing lights that are poles that are there now. However, as we started to look at the locations of where we would have to have it to give the look, a few poles needed to be added. So I just wanted to point out that this pole is a standard. There's a design for it available, and there's a contract that's available right now to get when one is how would I say it, if they have to replace one. The next part of the study of what we wanted to consider was the lamps themselves. The standard that everyone's used to is just standard incandescent light bulbs. Obviously, everybody's switched to LED now, and so there's white LED lights that mimic incandescent look. Another static option would be to get a colored light bulb, which they offer, several colors. We'll go across a few things too that I wanted to mention. With the colored light, you obviously want to avoid red and green and yellow because of the traffic considerations, because you wouldn't want someone to see a green light, but it was actually a red light that they went through. So the static colors also you're kind of set with if you pick that color. Luckily, there's the technology has increased to the point now where you can actually get color changing, even to the extent of every light bulb can be addressed individually, so that you could have anything from each row potentially being a different color just for special events, or every other light, or actually there can be motion. In all honesty, most of the traffic places these have been installed, they keep the color option only for special events, maybe special festival type things, or also maybe some holiday type things. but I do want to mention that even if you do the color changing option, you can set it for white most of the time.
Vice Mayor.
Go ahead, Councilmember
Thank you, Vice
Aldama.
Mayor. So when I was looking at the lamping page, I immediately thought that you were recommending incandescent lighting, but you said these are actually LED that mimic them. However, these are LED lamps that get screwed in to the base. Is there a reason why we're not going to an LED diode type rather than having to have maintenance on these?
Yes, as a matter of fact, what's shown here was some of our studies, but agree 100%. To have the lamp is probably an easier one to maintain because of that, but the diode type is what we're recommending, and it is able to be replaced. It kind of clips onto the wire and actually punctures the wire whenever it's placed on. So you would replace the whole bulb if needed. Does that answer the question?
So thank you for that. So just a little more clarity.
Yep.
So if one lamp went out, our staff would have to get a lift truck out there to replace one lamp and continue that, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Because of the height, we're probably going to be to the point where, we're 30-foot poles. We're not mounting them at the very top, but it's going to be, yes, higher than 16 foot, say.
Thank you. And the reason why I'm asking for the diode type, it's not a base mounted like this one, is so that we get, 10 years out of them before staff has to get up there and start changing these lamps. So is there another option that you have that doesn't have this type of incandescent base where they screw in?
Yes.
Like a mogul base?
Yes. When we get to the page that has our recommendation, it is a kind that does not screw in. It is clipped to the wire itself.
Then I am premature in my question, sir. Thank you very much.
Yep, no problem.
Vice Mayor,
Councilmember?
thank you. Couple of questions.
Mm-hmm.
What color options are available? Can't use red, green, or yellow. To me, all that's left is blue.
Purple and orange is what's actually shown in this picture. I'm not sure you can tell it from the
You
photo
can't
there,
tell.
but they actually have a various colors of purple and orange is what's used there. There's also color combinations that could be, for example, blue and white. I would throw out, orange could be a Halloween. Red, white, and blue is something that maybe it could be used even though the red's in there, but if it's obvious that it's mixed with those colors. But yeah, orange and purple and blue are the main colors that pop up. I would say that variations of white could be warm white and cool white also.
All right, next question.
Mhm.
To incorporate the color changing technology, what's the difference in cost between remaining with the white lights or adding the color changing capability?
Our last slide is going to go over the costs completely, but it ends up, the controls portion of it is the main cost. In our estimate, I think it ended up being on the order of $20,000 is the actual controls cost. The difference in cost of the lamp and the stringer light is a lot less. I think for our first phase, it ended up being, I forget now, but on about 5,000, 3,000.
So the actual lamping material, the cost difference between white and color capability is $3,000.
Yes.
But the major cost is controlling the color of the lights.
Correct.
That is an additional $20,000.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay. So our design option, we looked at several ways of stringing them across the street, which there's the portal where it's just straight across, but the zigzag is obviously the one that gives you the most bang for the buck, so to speak, because it looks the fullest and uses the least amount of poles. In this image, on the phase one portion, The dots in red are existing poles that we could use. So as you can see, there were only 4 there available, and it very much limited how much you would see. So additional poles did need to be added. So we added 3 new ones to get what we called like the 3 peaks there. And each of those runs, like I said earlier, was less than 100 foot for a total of about 510 feet of festoon cabling. Phase 2 is shown here. I just kind of graded out, but this is what we were proposing to be able to do that one. And obviously you'll see there's a whole lot less existing poles. There's only 2 poles on that portion to work with. A couple fine notes here of what we weren't able to necessarily study was the structural integrity of the existing poles. So that's a part of the engineering portion that we'll talk about that needs to be done. So structural engineering would need to look at that. The electrical engineering and complexity is also something that's not covered in our conceptual study that we did. However, we did look at the location of where electrical is available for holiday lights nearby already. There's a potential that we could tap into that. This is where the controls question that you had, there's obviously no controls there now, so that would all have to be put in cable and conduit for that. That's where the additional cost of that comes from. Okay.
Just 1 second. Councilmember Tomacha?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I'm a little bit confused because I'm looking at the slide, what page is this? The one that shows the design option study layout, and it shows Phase 1, Glendale Avenue between 58th and 58th Avenue and 58th Drive, and then Phase 2 going east on Glendale Avenue. And then when you go back to slide 3, I thought when we first discussed this that we were going to do Glendale Avenue, and then we increased the budget to the $185,000 to go around the corner onto 58th Avenue. So now I'm seeing, is 58th Avenue now considered Phase 3, or I'm just really confused.
Vice Mayor and Councilmember Tolmachov, yes. So the northern leg to go on 58th Avenue between Glendale Avenue and Glen Drive would be a Phase 3 of the project. Based on what we know today and based on the opinion of probable costs, what we're speaking about today is the budget specifically for Phase 1 of the project. As we discussed back in September, Phase 2 and Phase 3 would be explored as part of this initial to understand what the opinion of probable cost is for those phases, but there was always an expectation that we would need to come back to the council, most likely to ask for funding to construct Phase 2 and Phase 3 of the project, if that was council's desire.
Vice Mayor, if I could, that's not how I recall it. I recall that we increased the budget and that if there was additional funds needed, but the priority was to go north around the park because we were, planning on having the music in the park and things like that, rather than I thought that was what the preference of the council was, rather than to continue east on Glendale Avenue. So I'm thoroughly confused. I can go back and watch the meeting and look at the minutes, but I'm confused how 58th Avenue now is the third priority.
Vice Mayor and Councilmember Tolmachov, that's just how we've phased it in terms of the order of priority for the opinion of probable cost. It doesn't necessarily mean that they could be constructed differently at different timelines. That is something that we would need to bring forward to council once we have an opinion of probable cost on those next 2 legs. So, ultimately, those next 2 legs along Glendale Avenue continuing east and then north from Glendale Avenue would certainly be at the discretion of the council as to how you'd like to proceed.
Mayor, if I could, just to make sure that I understand this correctly then. So the original amount proposed was, I want to say around $90,000 or $100,000 when it was brought to workshop in September, somewhere around that amount. And that there was additional VIP money, CDBG money available, and there was a consensus of the council to go ahead and devote that money to this project. Whether it was to 58th Avenue, I'm going to leave that part of the conversation out, but I thought that was what the intent was. Nevertheless, the cost of this project on the initial phase 1 is going to consume that budget. Is that what we're being told?
Vice Mayor and Council Member Tomachoff, based on the opinion of probable costs, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Question.
Councilmember Clark?
I am confused as well, but I understand now that the proposal is to spend $185,000 to string up cafe lighting from 58th Drive to 58th Avenue along Glendale Avenue. Is that correct?
Vice Mayor and Councilmember Clark, the request before you today, when we get to the end, is to increase that budget. So currently, there's $185,000.
I understand. I'm just going to talk about the existing amount agreed upon. I know there's a request for even more money, but I just want to confirm that according to the original budget amount of $185,000, which we assumed would cover far more, now only covers from 58th Drive to 58th Avenue on Glendale Avenue. Is that correct?
Vice Mayor and Councilmember Clark, based on the work that's been done with the consultant to develop a fully vetted opinion of probable costs and to account for exceptions that we do not yet know because of structural and electrical engineering, yes, we believe that the budget that we're requesting is going to cover phase 1. Now, I will characterize that as this is what we're proposing as a worst-case scenario. So you'll see when we get to the last slide where we talk about the assumptions that we're making in this opinion of probable cost, it accounts for those assumptions. So full pole replacement, if the existing poles cannot be utilized because of the current foundation that they have. So there are a lot of unknowns in this project. The reason why it's important for us to have this conversation transparently is so that we all understand that, and I apologize if it wasn't clear in September, that there are a lot of unknowns to this project based on the structural and electrical engineering that would be required. So we just want to make sure that we're sharing that with the council. We'll continue to provide updates to the council, and we'll know more about how we can manage the next 2 legs of this project, if that's what council's direction is, based on what we learned from the construction of this particular project.
Okay. Here's my concern. Is it going to come to the same amount to do each phase? Because we're up to nearly $250,000, $221,000 if we approve the recommended action in here. $250,000 to do just one phase, one small portion. I would assume that it would cost another nearly $250,000 to do phase 2 and another $250,000 to do phase 3. Now we're up to close to somewhere in the neighborhood of $750,000. We're talking real money. I just wonder if that money couldn't be better utilized downtown than to pay for a lighting system. So as I hear the costs go up, and as has been indicated, there are a lot of variables and uncertainties that I suspect will drive up the cost even further. I'm just not sold that this is a project we want to start and be saddled with for the next couple of years at the kind of costs we're talking about, when I think that money might be better spent on other projects in downtown. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Go ahead, Councilmember Thomas.
I just went back. I'm not going to read the minutes right now, but I did go back to the September when this project was first presented to the council, and we were presented with a dollar amount of $106,250 one-time construction. So I just wanted to put that out there before we get wherever we're going to end up today. Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you. I think we also need to take into account what we asked staff to do. We asked staff to go out, evaluate this, and now they're coming back saying, we thought we could just string lights up with the existing poles. But now we don't know that because those existing poles may be falling down if we put the lights up on them. And I think we need to recognize that those poles are going to have to be fixed anyway. Whether or not we put lights across them, if there's structural problems with those poles now, and we can't put a light across them, then I think we need to consider that they're going to have to be replaced anyway, and the cost is going to go up. So I get the concept of we thought we were going to get something for $185,000. But I think we need to recognize staff has done their job. They've gone out, they've said, look, we thought we could do this for $106,000 or whatever the number was, but we've discovered that there are lots of problems. Just like when we went out to Saguaro Ranch and realized that there are lots of issues at Saguaro Ranch with the awnings and those issues out there that need to be addressed that we weren't aware of. And so I think as we discuss this, we need to take into account the staff has done their job today. They have come forward, they've brought forward this project, they've said, you know, it's going to cost more because we found things that we didn't realize were there. And I don't think we can say, well, we can't do it now because it's over budget. We need to look at it and say, do we want to fix this problem with the potential light problems and the light poles? Or do we want to not just fix those problems and not put the lights up? Or do we want to go ahead and do it all at once? And I think we need to decide as council and then recognize staff is just doing their job when they come back with these increased proposals. It's not because of any fault of their own. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Well, Councilman Aldama.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I agree with Councilmember Malinar here. On several occasions, I've heard individuals at that dais say that I didn't come prepared to negotiate from the podium, and that's one of the worst things that staff can do. But it's what they do for us is provide estimates from the podium, and that's really difficult. So I absolutely agree with the council member that was just a high-level estimate, and it's clear right here that there's a ton of unknowns. So it's pretty obvious that the project isn't going to come in right at budget or underneath budget. But to Councilmember Clark, downtown Glendale is worthy of the lights. I agree it's a large dollar amount, but this isn't a project that's going to last just a couple of years. We're going to take it down. That's why I said I wanted to make sure we're choosing the right lighting so we get 10 years out of that lamp, and for another 20, 30 years, those things are up. So we want to better downtown. We want pedestrian traffic. This is what it's going to take. I think it's a great investment, and I am very supportive of our staff bringing forward to us the unknowns, and unfortunately, that's going to cost us more if we want to do it right the first time. So I just want to share with our council that downtown is worthy of it, and I know we spend lots of dollars in downtown, but it's part of our revitalization efforts. Thank you.
Councilmember Clark.
Thank you. I do appreciate the work of staff, and I do understand that their original proposal was an estimate. But as costs continue to climb for this project, due to getting more information on the unknowns, the variables that they were not able to really inspect at the beginning of the project, as the costs continue to mount, I will continue to question whether this is a wise investment in downtown. I appreciate Councilmember Aldama's opinion that downtown deserves this, and they deserve a lot of things. And I'm not sure that this is the ultimate project that is suddenly going to bring all kinds of people downtown. As I've said repeatedly, until we develop a true destination location downtown will continue to falter, and I'm not sure that putting lights up remedies anything, and is almost a feel-good project. But if I had my druthers right now, I would fish or cut bait and say, I don't want to do it. I'd rather use that money for something else. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Vice Mayor.
Welcome. Councilmember.
Yeah, along those lines, you know, some good thoughts, because I believe we are looking at doing some revitalization in the downtown area. We have some upcoming workshops, perhaps, where we're going to talk about what we can do for downtown. Perhaps it might be wise for us to include this discussion about these lights in that. That might be an option. I think I would defer to staff as well, because they're putting, they kind of understand where some of these things will all fall out. Maybe doing lights right now is a little premature. Maybe it won't fit exactly into how we end up with a downtown, with a plan, that could even come forward this year, at least a plan. So perhaps we do wait until we see what else we decide to do with downtown and put a plan together inclusive of the lights, unless we really feel that these lights are going to make a big impact today. Is it going to make an impression or a change in today? And I'd like to, have some input on what we would expect from doing that today. Thank you.
Welcome.
Mayor.
Who said that? Oh, go
Thank
ahead.
you, Vice Mayor. Just ask one question first before I continue. The council gave consensus to go forward with the project at $185,000. Is that correct?
Vice Mayor and Councilmember Aldama, yes, that is correct.
Thank you. So, to the council, we felt it was important to have these lights at nearly a $250,000 at $185,000. Staff is asking to do it right the first time, in addition to $36,000. We weren't too far away from $250,000 the first time around at $185,000. It doesn't concern me, but I take a step back and say, staff's brought to us, we can do it for $185,000, except for to do it right and do it safe. It's an additional $36,000. It's not a lot to ask. We were just as close to $250,000 at $185,000 than we are $221,000. I'm not saying we just throw money at the wind here, but we weren't that far away in the first place, and we thought it was important. All of a sudden, we're changing directions here that maybe it's just not important to do it. So I guess I am a little concerned that we were that close, but now we're too close. So I'll yield. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Hold on, no. Well, thank you, Councilman Aldama. Just a second, but I agree with the comments. I like the lights, and I'm glad we're coming back with prices, getting some better ideas on what it might cost. And I could hardly wait. I see the pictures. I think it'd be great when it, heads north also, in the phases. If you go to 51st and Glen, I bought a light over there, and that was 30 years ago, and it cost me $20,000. So I think we're getting, a pretty good price on poles at the same time. But I'd like to hear from our city manager.
Mr. Vice Mayor, members of the council, maybe some other kind of loosely tied together information that will help you as you're deliberating this. First of all, just again, a reminder that this is CDBG funding for beautification, so it has some limitations on it. And maybe you ask the broader question: is 185 or 200,000 for streetlights? If it were coming out of general fund that maybe funds your parks and your public safety, yeah, I think you have a little bit different conversation. This is out of the beautification grant, and there is a timeline on that. So we do have some, some elements that if we aren't able to come up with a project, it will go away. I think the only way to look at this would be to look at not as a one-year cost, but look at amortizing the cost of the lighting out over a 10-year plus timeline. I think that's important to kind of think about it there. And then with respect to the other legs, I think clearly all of us on the staff saw the numbers go a lot higher than we estimated. There was no example for us to pull on to even really develop an estimate. We now have that after working with the consultant. And so you may determine that legs 2 and legs 3 maybe are not of the best value. The main thing is you've got a landing area as people come down our namesake city or right adjacent to the park. And what you may decide is maybe instead of lighting on the east side of Murphy Park, we're going to be coming back to you with some concepts of potentially permanently lighting our downtown, like in our park area, versus our annual. And so you may say maybe the money would be better spent on a long term. But I think I would look at that first phase as being it could stand alone, it could certainly be expanded, but you probably would want to look at that over a period of time and just remind yourself that there is kind of dedicated funding for that that does have some timelines to it. Thank you, Mr. Vice
Thank
Mayor.
you. Councilmember Tomacha?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I just think, I don't think we should not do it, but I am a little bit surprised, and I'm also a little bit surprised because I did, since I had a minute, I went back to the minutes, and it says, Mayor Wires recommended extending the area east to 58th Avenue and north to Glen Drive, and that is when the additional money was dedicated. So the original, what was presented, what was in the PowerPoint, and I understand costs can change, they didn't have a complete scope of what needed to be, but this is literally more than double. And then I'm also confused as to why, since there was clearly a council consensus that the mayor made this recommendation and there was a consensus to go down 58th Avenue, why that is the last part of this project and not the next step of the project. I don't know how that got changed, whether that's got something to do with, not being able to go around the corner. I'm not exactly sure why. So I think that's where my confusion is coming from, is a lot has changed since the last time we talked about this. So the consensus was, based on the minutes from the September 8th meeting, to $106,000 and some change to do Glendale Avenue, take the rest of the money and go around the corner. And there was discussion that it may take more money than that. But there was clearly a consensus to not go east on Glendale Avenue, to go north on 58th Avenue. So I'm just curious if the contractor could give us an explanation as to maybe if that's going to be very expensive to do, or why the next phase has changed.
Vice Mayor and Councilmember Tolmachov, so the next two legs were always intended to be study legs to understand opinion of probable costs, to refine the cost estimate. The direction that was provided by council was, yes, we want to construct the first phase of the project between 58th Drive and 58th Avenue and study those two additional, which is what we're presenting to you today. In order to get to the opinion of probable costs for those other two legs, we can do that within the existing consulting contract, and we do intend to do that. We do have an idea of what the leg between 58th Avenue and 57th Drive will look like. We do not yet know what the northern leg will look like. It's not intended to be that staff has changed council's priorities. We're studying, and we were directed to move forward with constructing the first leg and studying the other two legs, which is what we're continuing to do.
Councilmember Clark?
I've already made my opinion known with regard to the feasibility of this project. I will simply say this. I liked what Councilmember Malnar said. If we're about to have a discussion on further options for downtown, I would think that this would be an appropriate part of the mix of that discussion. And I know the money is tight. Look, I appreciate all the work that you've done. And when you work on a project, you get invested in the project and you want to see the project happen. I understand that too. But if this money is to be used for beautification of downtown Glendale, I can think of 10 other ways to use this money to beautify downtown Glendale. And it isn't cafe lighting. But again, I've made my position known. I remain a minority position on this, but I don't think we should take this up until we've had a broader discussion on what's happening downtown. And it's my understanding it's CDBG money. It's got to be spent by July 1st, by the end of the fiscal year. Is that correct?
Vice Mayor and Councilmember Clark, the various funding years for this project is spread out over 3 different funding years, so there are various timelines for expending the funds. I would like to point out that when we met with you in December to talk about everything CDBG and all of our grants, one of the things we talked about was we have remnant funding from other projects that came in under budget. Right now, we know that there's about $550,000. You had provided direction at that time to set that aside for physical improvement projects. So that is funding in addition to this $185,000 that we're talking about. Additionally, as we're continuing to reconcile projects, we believe that there will be more remnant funding that can be dedicated to fiscal improvement projects. And so I just want to make that point that we're already having discussions with Mr. Friedline and his team, specifically in transportation, to talk about areas within the city. And this is, again, something that we talked about in December, where we can utilize this funding in our low-income census tracts to do physical improvement projects for the purpose of increasing neighborhood livability, so areas where we're missing street gutter and sidewalk and things like that. So what we're planning to do with the balance of that funding is to work with Mr. Friedline to develop a shovel-ready list of projects that are run through a CIP screening matrix to bring it to council to prioritize those investments as well. So I would just like to point that out because it's important to know that making this investment of the $185,000, and if council chooses to provide direction to increase the budget, it's not going to detract from our ability to do additional neighborhood projects.
I understand that, and I'm considering this strictly as a standalone project, not what repercussions it has or does not have on other projects. I will ask one final question. What's the drop-dead date to spend this money that we're considering?
Vice Mayor and Councilmember Clark, I'll have to get back to you on that particular question. The one thing that I will say is because we've already, the direction that was provided by council was to move forward with constructing phase 1. That was specific direction that was provided in September. We've spent money on this project. We've spent CDBG funding on this project, which means we need to complete this project. If we don't complete this project, we will need to reimburse the CDBG funding.
How much money has been spent today?
I want to say approximately $32,000. But let me get back to you with a definitive answer if we do not get consensus direction today.
Right. I've already made my opinion known. I don't have any further comment.
Vice Mayor?
Councilmember Tomachoff, and
Quick question, and maybe I missed it. Have we received other cost proposals, or is this the only cost proposal we've received?
Vice Mayor and Councilmember Tolmachoff, we hired the design consultant to give us an opinion of probable costs. When we go out to do the structural engineering and the electrical engineering, that's when those costs will continue to get refined. Mr. Friedline, is there anything you would like to add on that?
Yeah, Vice Mayor, City Council, if I could, I think we're looking at slide 13 at the budget, and it shows $221,000. And I can just say to you that if you give us some time, allow us to move forward with fine-tuning this, I'll give you a simple example. I'm going to call this worst-case scenario estimate, and Mark can jump in and stop me anytime he wants, but for just a simple example, under the designation of poles that has $28,000, we have 4 poles that are existing. The assumption would be, my assumption would be we can use these poles. There's $16,000 difference between that and what would be in the final cost. The contingencies, we haven't fine-tuned those. I can guarantee you that they're not less than what we think they are. They're typically more than what they think we are. And Mark can stop me anytime he wants. There are also other potential differences with reference to getting this number down. For example, if you don't want color, you can save up to over $30,000 if I'm not correct.
Mr. Freeland, it's approximately $23,000 if council would like to stay with the static white option.
And what I'm thinking, I don't know what the trigger point is, but, I think this opinion of probable cause has a lot of preparatory work and engineering in it that doesn't have to be done a second and third or fourth time for other phases. But that being said, perhaps we can just move forward with just a little more design and come back with maybe a better framework for what specifically phase 1 is and estimates on phase 2 and 3. It's just a suggestion. Like I say, it might be a bit unfair to create such a large estimate for a lot of preparatory work and call it $221,000 And then it's, of course, a different issue with the other phases. There are a different number of poles. There's some variation. If you look at phase 2, if it's too expensive, perhaps we take out 2 poles and we still get the kind of look we want. So I still think we should continue down the road and come back to City Council maybe with more options based on what we've heard today.
Thank you. Councilmember Melnar?
Yeah, were you finished?
If I could-
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I think we should move forward. I think that this is going to be, it's an important thing to do for downtown. I think we were all a little bit surprised where we are with the cost. I, for one, don't think the color is a big deal because you can't use red or green, which means you can't do St. Patrick's Day, you can't do Christmas, you can't, I mean, how many holidays are we going to be able to do with purple and orange? So, I mean, to me, the cafe, and I mean, especially if you're thinking of Pioneer Square and places like that in Seattle, I mean, I don't think that they change the color of the lights. The lights are the attraction. So I just don't know how many holidays you're going to be able to accentuate by not being able to use red and green because it's Valentine's Day, you know, different, especially Christmas when we have the lighting in downtown. Anyway, I'm fine with just the white lights, and I'm ready to, I just want to know I'd like for staff to try to stay within the 185,000. That would make me comfortable with moving forward, saying we're going to stay within the original. We're going to try to tweak it as best we can if we go a little bit over, but if we can stick to as best we can, and by eliminating the colored lights, if there's a consensus not to do that, that would make that pretty doable to stay within the $185,000. So, thank you.
Else?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Based on what's been stated here today, I would be in favor of moving this project forward. As far as the lights, I can't see the colors that well anyway, so, but I still like colored lights. I don't have a problem with the colored lights. I think the thing I'm looking at is, you know, our second to last page where it says, you know, the recommendations from staff. I think they've done a lot of hard work on this, and they are making a recommendation that we do include the option for color. They've studied it, they've thought about it, they've rationalized why we'd want to do it. So I would go along with the consensus of the council, but I think we should go ahead and move forward with the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Aldama?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. So a little bit of what Councilmember Clark was mentioned earlier. This is within the beautification category, but that isn't all that the lights would create. So downtown, we're all trying to create a destination or more of a destination for downtown. These lights would do that. We all want more walkable traffic. These lights will help increase that. We all want more business in downtown. This will increase that. And then we want our downtown to be a more modern type historic downtown, if you will. This will help that. This also went through the SLAG group, so a lot of business owners weighed in on it and agreed that the lighting is what they would like to see. So with that said, either colored or white, doesn't really make a difference to me. All along it was white light, so I'm okay with that. I do appreciate staff saying, here's what it looks like to have color. I think that's great. Thank you for bringing that. But at the end of the day, if it means these cafe lights go forward without color, I'm okay with that. I have no problem whatsoever. But I do want to thank staff for bringing all these numbers in the presentation and apologize to the architect who we bombarded. And, sir, welcome to our meetings. We do that quite often, but thank you so much, and thank you, Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Turner?
Thank you, Vice Mayor, and thank you to the other council members for your input. It's helped me kind of formulate my thoughts about this. And also, I'm appreciative that the city manager pointed out that perhaps we should look at this as amortizing the cost of this over the lifespan of the projects, the value that it would be there, its lifespan, so that's 10 or 20 years, other than perhaps the bulbs themselves. I did have a question about the additional posts that would be added. would those only be the vertical portion of the post, or would it also include are these priced at the cost of the horizontal arm and the street lamp as well? Because I'm not certain that we would need to add that to it.
Yeah, the cost would be just the vertical post itself. There would be no need to add additional. The one thing that we definitely looked at was that the light levels were not in question. In other words, existing lighting levels would be increased by these lights, but we weren't looking to add any additional street pole lights. Also, I want to add one little note too. In the opinion of probable cost, we're showing the cost of the light pole based on some facts of what historically they've cost, but it has also contingencies in there. But ironically, some of these poles will be dead ends, so to speak, so there's really no power there. The stringer light gets its power from the pole on the one side, goes to a dead end on the other side. So I think the costs are based on the fact that they would need to have electrical, so there's a buffer there that I think once you get into the actual bidding time, it comes down instead of goes up.
Thank you. And to the point on the post, you did give consideration to stringing these from the buildings where possible and decided against that?
We did look at that. First of all, the buildings, two issues with that. The height of the buildings and the distance does make it longer and tougher to do that. But also there are multiple heights, and you get into several situations of figuring out how structurally to mount those, and also the ownership of those and the maintenance to get to those connection points. A place like High Street in Phoenix, they have the stringer lights over there, and it was a big boon for them to get the people to come, and the retail really appreciated the aesthetics that it brought and the people that it brought. They had the ability to go from roof to roof and not need poles, but they were all the same height, and it's a little different there.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, and thank you for mentioning, well, first, I wanted to make sure that we had considered the building heights and that it got a little bit of discussion here, that the buildings just aren't appropriate. In our situation, thanks for mentioning High Street. That's been my example of what we could accomplish with this type of lighting here. If anybody's not familiar with it, it certainly is worth looking at, I think, to see how it creates a sense of place when you're there. As in regards to the color changing option, I've been an advocate of color changeable lights in our downtown, and I remain an advocate of that, except that in this situation, because these are the overhead lights and that they would visually conflict with the signal lights, the red, green, and yellows, I don't think it would be wise for us to do that, and I do know that from our experience with Glendale Glitters, that the street level lights, the pedestrian, size lights on the trees and such, that gives us the ability to create color in our downtown, and in a way that we could do in the future that would be changeable without, and of course, during Glendale Glitters, it doesn't conflict with the traffic lighting. So I think we still could have that opportunity in the future with street level and tree lighting to create the changeable downtown that we might want to have and have the full color array available to us, not worrying about the conflicts. I do think we need to be mindful that, I don't recall if we discussed this before, but I can't imagine it would not have an impact on the future of glitter and glow on these, whatever streets we choose to put these lights in. Maybe a consideration too as to whether the advantage of taking it down the side streets to speak of. So, in short, those were my concerns, and I appreciate the input, and I can support moving forward with what we've identified as phase one with the non-changeable lights.
If I could address one thing that I'm a little less a proponent or for color or not. In other words, there are pros and cons that. One pro that I would like to make sure everyone understands is if you get the color changing light, they can be white also. So in other words, you do get that option that they're always white. There are also I want to say, glitter effects with just white lighting. There are movement. The one rendering I have, actually, I got, let me go back one page. It's hard to see in this slide, possibly, but one thing that I would say is a nice way to do a winter festival, festive lighting is blue and white. Every other light fixture is a different color. The other thing I would mention with this is everyone has seen the white lighting. This would put, you know, your city would be the first in town to do it. We saw an example of it in Texas and in Las Vegas. They did 11 blocks of it, and we were able to kind of learn from what they learned from it. However, I'm going to say the cons, just the same, is the cost. The reason there's the cost is someone does have to make these decisions on what color they're going to be. It has to be programmed. It can be on a timer, but maybe you have a parade going through that you want for that parade, just some special effect or whatever. And it can be kept white most of the time, but that does entail programming, cabling, and a location for a controller. So that's the reason it costs more. So the light fixture looks exactly the same. As a matter of fact, on this page, you can see the cut sheet. It's the same cut sheet for whether you want the white or the color. It's a checkbox of which one you want, basically. But the controls do end up being very different.
Thank you. Councilmember Turner, I agree with your comments on the color lights. I always thought that was set us up above other cities, and making the point also that everybody has whites, and that'd give us an opportunity to maybe have a jazz festival when we have the blue lights running. I'm in favor of moving forward with the staff recommendation and still considering the color lights. Do we have consensus to move forward?
Yes.
I'm convinced.
Okay.
Colored lights.
Okay, we have it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Bowers, would you introduce item 4?
Community Development Investment Strategy Update Fiscal Year 2021-22 and CDBG CV3.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, here to provide staff report on item number 4 today will be Jean Marino, our Director of Community Services, and she'll be joined by Matthew Hess, our Administrator for Community Revitalization.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Again, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. So today's presentation is to provide an update on the fiscal year 21-22 public service grant applications. We discussed with the council in December at workshop regarding this process, and then also some recommended changes to CARES Act investments as a result of new congressional allocations of funding. So we'll start off the presentation by providing you with a couple of program updates that are specific to those CARES Act funds that Council had previously provided direction on. And then Mr. Hess will go through the fiscal year 21-22 public service grant applications overview. We'll discuss the work that we've done with CDAC, the Community Development Advisory Committee, around this new process that we've utilized this year, and then ultimately some staff recommendations. So the one thing, there's two pieces that I'd like to just point out. One, the grant process that we ran this year and the review process, there was a significant amount of work put into creating a matrix that the subcommittee of CDAC really worked very hard on. So I'm very proud of the work that they've done on that. And you know, what the few times that we've come and spoken to the council regarding these investments, we've talked about the changes that we're making and how we would like to work with the council and CDAC to invest these dollars to ensure that they're creating the highest benefit for our community. And so you'll see that reflected in these recommendations. And then lastly, the situation that we're dealing with the pandemic and the continued investments by Congress into relief programs is really requiring us to be agile and nimble as we're making these investments in our community. So you'll see that reflected in our recommendations today as well.
Thank you. Vice Mayor, members of the council. The first program that I would like to update you about is the Pandemic Small Business Assistance Program that was agreed upon by the council in December. You can see that we did award that administration of that program to Chicanos por la Causa, or CPLC. That program launched towards the end of January, and in the first couple of weeks, we saw that there were 28 applications. Now, this assistance was tailored to the smaller businesses, the mom and pops, those businesses with 5 or fewer employees, and there's been resounding interest. Currently, there are 4 approved applications with money has been dispersed, and we are in the process of working with CPLC to get reimbursement to them for those projects. There are an additional 3 that are in underwriting, are likely to be approved probably within the next week or so. And they have also 20 additional applications that they have pre-screened and are moving towards underwriting. So of the money that we have allocated, there is significant need. We have had a discussion with them recently about the possibility of accepting additional funds, and they have indicated that that is something that they would be able to accommodate and spend money quickly. The next 2 activities that we'd like to provide you with an update on are 2 unfunded applications that the council provided consensus to fund back in December. The one was, first one is the Sojourner Center. This is a scope change request. There is no additional money attached to this particular request. After we received the consensus, we received from Sojourner Center, we received notice that they had already they had found that funding gap, and they requested that we change the scope of work from lay legal services for their domestic violence victim clients to supporting their transitional housing efforts. And so again, this is just a scope change, but we felt that it was sufficiently different enough that it needed to have the council's, we needed to bring that forward to you. The second unfunded application was related to community legal services. That was also one of the projects that the council provided consensus to fund. In speaking with community legal services since then, they were not confident that they would be able to spend the full award. So they would like to leave about $33,500 of the COVID funding, CDBG CV3, which would require that to be reallocated to a different activity, which we will discuss in future slides.
So in addition, since we met with you in December, the Congress approved about $32 billion in an emergency broadband program to be administered by the Federal Communication Commission. And this particular funding is designed to, and I'm going to read my notes because I don't want to get the details incorrect, but the particular program is designed to provide a discount of up to $50 per month towards broadband service for eligible households, and a one-time discount of up to $100 to purchase a laptop, desktop, or tablet from participating providers. You'll recall that when we met with the council, we were recommending a couple of projects to make investments in to address digital connectivity issues in our community. The first was the mobile hotspot program of an allocation of $500,000. Because of this new FCC emergency broadband funding, we do believe that what we had proposed would likely create a duplication of benefit. And so we're recommending, and we spoke to CDAC about this recommendation, so we're recommending that funding be reallocated due to the circumstances of this new $3.2 billion. Additionally, in working through the public housing Wi-Fi project, so you'll recall that the proposal that we had presented to council was to invest in Wi-Fi technology for our 3 public housing facilities. So we engaged with technology and innovation to help in terms of understanding the initial feasibility and then also understanding the long-term viability, because one of the things we need to be cognizant of is our ability to maintain an investment of that nature over a period of time, whether it's because we have a good community partnership with a provider or we need to account for that in the housing operating budget, et cetera. So in working with technology and innovation, the work is still underway and we are still going to continue to conduct feasibility, but it's clear that it will take a little bit longer to really come to some recommendations and some decisions about that funding. And so we are also recommending that $500,000 also be reallocated. And the reason being is because both of those programs were recommended for funding with COVID-related funding. So it is critical that, to the degree possible, we move quickly and get that money out into the community. And based on what we're seeing with the Small Business Assistance Program, we do see that there obviously is a much greater need there. Additionally, we received more than 2 times the amount of public service grant applications than we could fund with fiscal year 21-22. And the CARES Act allows a waiver for investments in public services. So we do have the ability to, and we'll talk about this on future slides, should it be council's desire to reinvest this $1 million into both additionally funding small business assistance, as well as fully funding all of the grant applications that we received through the process that was opened in December. And Mr. Hess will talk in detail about those particular recommendations.
Thank you, Ms. Moreno. As she mentioned, we received approximately $750,000 of requests through 16 applications. There are approximately $370,000 available for fiscal year 22 public services. HUD has not given us a waiver for the 15%, which has been a part of the CARES Act funding, the CDBG CV1 and CV3 that we've received. So we are proceeding under the assumption that that 15% cap will apply to FY22. So hence, we only have about $370,000 for the regular funding to fund these applications. Now, we did review these, as Ms. Moreno had said, under the lens of having a COVID-related response, and so that covers a number of types of activities that are directly related to COVID, which could be funded with the portion of the CV3 money from the mobile hotspots, including housing, senior services, tutoring, basically anything related to loss of employment or underemployment related to COVID. Anything related to schools and helping students, workforce development, business development, those sorts of things, and particularly also seniors are particularly hard hit by COVID, and so any of those public service activities that address those would have a COVID-related impact. And again, just to remind you, there is no public service cap on the CARES Act funding, which means we can use the available, should the council wish to reallocate that would be available to supplement and fund each of the public service applications in full. And just as a reminder, in December, the council provided direction to us to focus the CDBG public service dollars strictly on the vulnerable populations, which you see up here. These are primarily youth, seniors, those with food insecurities, veterans, DV victims, and the disabled. Although there are a couple of others, applications that we did receive that are not, service populations that are not on this list. So just to continue with the scoring, we did work with, I should say staff worked with the CDAC grant subcommittee that was created in September to create an objective scoring ranking system. The CDAC subcommittee and the larger committee as a whole agreed to create 4 broad areas to review, one of which, and these were based much on council priorities or council direction that we had received, one of which was overall administrative funding. The subcommittee and the larger committee decided to pick 10% as a good number, an efficient way of showing administrative expenses. And so we have all but 2 of the proposals did have administrative costs below 10%, with the exception of Phoenix Rescue Mission, which came in at 15.2%, and CPLC came in at 14%. The CDAC is making a recommendation to fund these in full with either a combination of the CV3 or the regular CDBG funding. So in these two cases where you have the administrative funding is a bit higher than what what we had anticipated, there is quite a high impact. So these applications rated consistently much higher in other areas, but not too far off from that 10% that the CDAC subcommittee had decided on. And if you look at the overall, we have a really good range of services and population served. So we have 2 that are focusing on youth, 5 for the disabled, 1 is for food insecurity, 1 will be servicing refugees, and that's a business assistance and employment assistance for refugees to help integrate into, into American business society. 1 servicing veterans, 3 for seniors, 2 for domestic violence victims, and 1 for legal services. So the community need for these is very significant, and this is a one-time opportunity. As COVID is continuing, the CDAC felt that they would like to recommend funding all of these in full because the need remains considerable through the COVID pandemic, and all investments would benefit City of Glendale residents.
Vice Mayor?
Councilmember?
Be sure that I understand. First of all, I want to congratulate both of you on the information that you presented to council. It was very thorough, very well done, very complete, and very extensive, and I know I am appreciative, and I'm sure the rest of council is appreciative of the time that it took and the effort that it took to compile this information. So I just wanted to say thank you for a job done well above expectation. Now, with regard to the recommendations that CDAC made, I just want to be clear. For example, Boys and Girls Club of the Valley requested $15,000, and the minimum amount accepted will be $10,000. So will we be fully funding all of these requested amounts? $30,000 in New Leaf, YWCA $80,000, et cetera, et cetera. So is that the current recommendation, that all of these be fully funded based upon the requested amount?
Vice Mayor and Councilmember Clark, that is correct. So in your packet, you should have a chart that is color-coded.
Yeah.
And the requested amount is the amount that's reflective of the total amount requested, not the minimum amount that they would accept.
Okay. Was it taken into consideration the fact that some of these programs offer duplicative services? They do exactly the same thing. And what is the rationale for awarding funds to organizations that duplicate the services?
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Clark, council members, yes, there was a consideration, and we did review each of these, and they're not duplicating services.
So someone that offers transitional housing, for example, there's not another nonprofit that we're awarding to that also offers transitional housing. Is that what I'm hearing?
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Clark, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Vice Mayor. That's all for now.
Okay.
Thank you. So today's recommendations, we have about 4 of them here that we wanted to go over with the council. So the first recommendation is to approve the scope change for the Sojourner Center. And again, as a reminder, that's for the fiscal year 1920 change in scope of work. It does not change the dollar amount. It just, the investment of $20,000 would be for the change to providing transitional housing services. The second recommendation that staff is making is to abandon the digital connectivity projects in favor of or because of the congressional investment in the emergency broadband program, and then to reallocate those funds, so to fully fund the 21-22 public service requests, utilizing, and I want to note here that the fiscal year 21-22 allocation that we're expecting is based on prior estimates. HUD has not given us our allocation amount yet. So when we go to adopt the annual action plan, there may be some variance in this number if the amount that HUD gives us is different. Our plan for addressing that, and we're, hopefully we're not more than 15 or 20% off of what the estimated allocation is, but the plan would be that we would make those adjustments administratively and inform the council of that when you adopt that annual action plan. But essentially what we're looking at is approximately $370,000 for the fiscal year 21-22 allocation to fund those public service grant applications, and then supplementing that with an additional $380,000 again to fully fund the $750,000 of the public service grant applications. And then lastly, to take the additional funding as a result of the $1 million that we're reallocating and to invest that in the small business assistance program, because we do see that that's going to continue to be a need at least over the next 18 to 24 months as well. So with that, we're looking for consensus direction on all 4 of those items today, sir.
Okay. Any other comments? Councilmember Tomachoff.
Thank you. I do have a question on the FCC Emergency Broadband Program. Have the details of that been laid out? I know Ryan and I have been working through the NLC ITC committee to try to get some formal details on that. Are we relatively certain we're going to be getting the money back through that program that we're reallocating?
Vice Mayor and Councilmember Tolmachoff. So I've been watching the website daily just to make sure that I understand what's going on. And what their website is saying right now is that program eligibility and participating provider details have not been announced, but the FCC is mobilizing people and organizations to help share information about the program. I will be registering Glendale as an outreach partner. What that means today, I don't know, because they haven't shared that much information, but I will be registering as an outreach partner. I believe that the intent is not that the city of Glendale would receive that funding and be distributing that funding, but it is a broader program that will be offered by the service providers themselves, and that, potentially a role for the city. Again, don't know how the program is going to lay out, but a potential role for the city could be to feed them eligible referrals.
Vice Mayor, so if I could ask a follow-up. So what would be the consequence if it doesn't pan out, if the FCC Emergency Broadband doesn't fill the gap that we were trying to fill with the digital connectivity product? What would be the fallout there?
Vice Mayor and Councilmember Tolmachoff, sorry. The potential would be that we'd have to come back to the council and process an action plan amendment. Typically, what we would be looking at is any other programs that are not expending the way that they should be expending. We would, again, come back to you and request to reallocate funding from another program. So essentially, say as an example, if we moved forward with increasing the small business assistance allocation to $653, but in 2 months, the emergency broadband for some reason doesn't happen, I would like to note that Congress has already allocated that funding specifically for that purpose. But if for some reason something happened, we would evaluate performance of all of the other providers and come forward to the council if we felt like that there was, a need to reallocate funding to support a program like that. But based on the investment that Congress has made, I don't foresee that as being an issue currently.
Okay. All right, thank you. It appears that they're kind of figuring that emergency broadband funding out as they go. So I agree. I think that we probably need to move on from it, and then we can hopefully, at least not directly the city, but the residents benefit from the emergency broadband funding. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Welcome. Any others? Council members? Do we have consensus to move forward with it? We do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Bowers, would you introduce item 5, please?
Fund balance and community investment project update.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, here to provide staff report today will be James Milanese. He's our Engineering Budget and CIP Administrator, and he'll be assisted by Assistant City Manager Jack Friedline.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Vice Mayor, City Council, I'd like to introduce James Milanese, our Engineering Department's Budget and CIP Administrator. He's been with us for several years and is promoted into this position. Has helped us create a new process and system to move our CIP program forward. He's also been assigned the AZ Cares projects coordination between the various departments and to ensure that we progress efficiently and collaboratively, and we'll be providing this update and future periodic updates to keep City Council informed of our progress. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Friedline. Vice Mayor, Council. The purpose of today's meeting is to provide an update on what's going on with the AZ Cares projects. It's a slight misnomer. We're calling it the AZ Cares projects, but as I'll touch on later, it's really a fund balance projects that we're able to complete because of the AZ Cares funding. So on October 27th, staff had a lengthy workshop with you to talk about, at first, the revenue projections and the forecasts for both the general sales tax and HERF and all the revenues that the city is going to come in. And then Ms. Moreno gave a presentation on the federal investments that are being made with the CARES Act and the other investments to directly help the community. At that point, Mr. Phelps provided a concept of there being a fund balance. He requested that council identify a stabilization fund for both the general sales tax and for HERF, as well as some funding to jumpstart the mega events for the Super Bowl. That left approximately $19.5 million that Mr. Friedline and Mr. Phelps then walked through one by one a series of 10 projects and a contingency amount. At the end of that discussion, there was leftover amounts, and they requested that council provide some additional projects. Council provided 3 items, and staff agreed to return in a month to provide better scope and pricing for those 3 projects. So again, that happened at the following meeting in November. And the listing of the projects is here with the approved authorized dollar amounts. So what I'd like to do today is to walk through each of these projects in order with you to give you an update on where we are with the progress of the projects and the spend to date, with the exception of holdback for contingency till the end of the project. This is really a cross-departmental effort. You can see here that we've got field operations, engineering, public facilities, recreation, special events, and transportation staff, all heavily involved in delivering these capital projects. As Jack said, one of my roles is to kind of coordinate the CIP within the city, the Title 34 projects. It's all the construction projects that we do. And so I've got a very high level knowledge of all these projects. However, there might be an occasion, if need be, that the directors are available to answer specific questions. If they're not in this room, they're next door. So the first of the projects we'd like to talk about today is pavement management. I want to start actually by reminding council of what happened in June when Mr. Ebersole and Mr. Friedline presented a revised $10.2 million pavement management plan. That plan has not changed. It's still planning on treating 117 miles of roadway. And to date, we're at $5.7 million spent. And that to date is probably about 2 weeks old. But we are well on pace for delivering the program that was presented to you in June. In the October meeting, the first project suggested was a $5 million investment into pavement management. With that, transportation and engineering believe we could complete 50 miles of roadway improvements. We're currently at a spend of $274,000. And the reason for that, why you don't see a big spend, is twofold. One, the question was asked during the October meeting, does staff have capacity to deliver these projects? We did, without a doubt. What we didn't necessarily have was the flexibility in our contracts. And so we've asked council to approve several contracts, which you did in amendments in January. So thank you for that. The other thing you have to keep in mind is with pavement management, it's seasonal. We really want to start work early in the morning when the pavement's already above 60 degrees. It's hard to do that in January and February. So what we are doing right now is all the prep work. We're putting down crack seal, getting it ready for in March and April to really hit the streets hard. We still believe that this goal of 50 miles can be accomplished by June 30th. The next project that was presented was for the community centers. That's for Rose Lane, Glendale, and O'Neill, and the dollar amount was $5 million. And I've broken this up into two parts, and the reason is we've got one part that we can complete immediately, and that's things like the roofing, which is already complete at all 3 community centers. We've got HVAC improvements going on. That's already completed at O'Neill, and will be complete at the other 2 in Glendale in April and Rose Lane in May. And then we have the parking lots. Again, similar to the pavement management, we don't want to do any sort of surface treatments when it's cold out. So we're working to do that in March and April. There's also an agreement before you tonight that's for more specific of parking lot treatments. It's a very similar treatment, but again, we want to get that for the flexibility so we're not taking away from pavement management program, that we can treat these community centers as soon as we can in March and April. The second part is this is a very large dollar amounts. And what staff want to do is take a look at how these facilities operate, how do you get from point A to point B from the entrance to the programming. And so the staff from Public Facilities, Recreation, and Special Events have recruited a design professional to help out with programming of these spaces. That programming is underway right now, and they will be coming back to you in April to talk to you more about that. With that in mind, we would like to defer some of the other improvements, the Wi-Fi, the painting, flooring, and the furnishings, until you've had an opportunity to review those concepts on programming. We certainly don't want to get in a situation where we're applying dollars to something that's just going to be redone later on down the line. Saguaro Ranch Park, there was $2.4 million committed. That would be for the HVAC, that's for the main house, the packing shed and guest house. Those will all be completed in May. We also are looking at the exterior lighting throughout the park, so we have a design professional who is looking at that. They're looking at solar, LED, and in the historical areas, historical LED. And so that report should be completed in May, and we can provide you with more information at that point. We're also negotiating we've selected a contractor, and we're negotiating with them on doing all of the remodel repairs. As you recall, they're very large structures. There's a lot going on with those. So we want to take our time, make sure we've got the scope complete, and we should be bringing a contract forward for that soon. I also want to touch on, there's 2 slides related to Saguaro Ranch Park. This was from the October meeting. There's another discussion that happened at the November meeting, so I'll have that slide here in a little bit. At the Foothills Recreation and Aquatic Center, the dollar amount was $1.9 million. I'm happy to report that we've already completed replacing the flooring throughout the facility. The skylight has been repaired, as is the folding wall replacement, which just happened last week. The parking lot, same thing applies that we talked about for the community centers. We want to get that work done in March and April. Staff is working on a contract to replaster the pools. And then they're also looking throughout the entire facility, all the aquatics upgrades they can do. Keep in mind, I think Mr. Friedline mentioned early on in October that we don't know the scope of these projects till we really get into them. And aquatics upgrades is a great example of that. Imagine you're taking apart your pool equipment and you find out you got to take care of 3 other things because of one item. So that list is building and the recreation staff is putting that together. We also have fencing that will be repaired or replaced in May. Heroes Regional Park, our council committed to an additional $1.25 million for Heroes Regional Park. And that really bought you 3 things. One, it ensured that we can keep that conceptual size of the lake. 2, the project wasn't funded until FY22, so it meant we could not break ground until July 1 at the earliest. We're now able to do so. We're targeting for an April start on construction there, and that will allow the project to be completed in December. We also enhanced and improved several amenities. So we're able to add an additional ramada, add a fountain that is lights up and is on a timer. There's additional turf and landscaping instead of just DG. The shade structures were expanded, and a second fishing pier was added. As with Saguaro Ranch, there are 2 slides for the Glendale Adult Center. The first part is the discussion of the entryway. The glazing and the metal was warped and was creating a potential safety hazard. So staff have recruited an architectural firm and a structural firm to do an evaluation of that work. We believe the work can be completed by July. However, while those professionals were on site, they did identify several other areas of concern throughout the facility, and so we're deeming that as a potential phase 2. So they're looking at that right now, and they're going to give us a report on that information soon about what other potential costs can be expected at that location. Rose Lane Pool, last spring, had a pretty big leak. We repaired that over the summer. Council committed to $450,000 to provide updates to that facility. Those are the pools, so that's the play and lap pools, repairing the pool surface, the tile, the rim gutters. It's repairing the slide and play structures, repairing the fiberglass, painting and waxing them. The fencing, repair, replacement, and painting were needed, and also replacing the shade fabric on the shade structures. All those items should be completed in May prior to the pool opening. Staff have also identified a need to replace the chlorine system on the site. There are some environmental issues they are working through with that. In addition, there's other aquatic systems, as with FRAC, as they're replacing valves and other pieces of equipment at the pools. They're building a laundry list of items that need to be addressed. And more information will be provided to council as that list is completed. Park restrooms, this is $1.2 million to replace the exterior restrooms at 3 parks, Bonsall, O'Neill, and Thunderbird Paseo. There was a discussion at the October meeting of what that meant, the concept of how those restrooms would look. That being said, there are still a tremendous amount of options on the aesthetics of the exteriors of these restrooms. And so staff are going to return in April with some options for council. We're also still trying to identify the best location for the restroom in Bonsall. If you recall, there was an issue with the existing sanitary sewer line, so that location has to be moved. But staff are just making sure that's at the best location to serve the public. Security cameras, Mr. St. John presented a request for $250,000 at 9 locations. And that was to connect the existing cameras at all these locations and add some new ones to the real-time crime center so that the police department is not forced to rely on transportation cameras or private cameras in the area. The design of that work has been completed. They're installing them and making those upgrades in conjunction with other work that's happening at the locations. I'd also like to add here that Mr. St. John did suggest that these cameras could be added at the other locations we're talking about today. And we can talk about that more as we get closer to the contingency discussion. Murphy Park, City Hall campus, the work's complete. All the black metal, the bollards, the pedestrian lights have been repaired, and the clock has been cleaned, and I can verify that it is working well. At the November meeting, council suggested 3 items. This is the first of them. This is to take a look at the Glendale Adult Center second floor. If you recall, it's an open shell right now. So staff have recruited a design professional to help out with programming and looking at 2 items. One, what can we do near term? I believe there was a suggestion made, should it be used for swing space as other facilities are renovated? And then also taking a look at what the options are for recreation staff out there in the future. So that report should be available in June. The Saguaro Ranch entry and fence painting, this is along the 59th Avenue alignment and also along Mountain View to the parking lot. This was a large number that staff presented. We've been able to negotiate some better pricing for this work. And we believe we can grow it over that initial portion that was discussed. In fact, right now, I believe the current estimate is closer to $75,000 to complete the entire perimeter painting at Saguaro Ranch Park. Okay. The last of these is the Business Support Services Program Manager. This was a bit of a discussion during the meeting in November. I'm showing you two numbers here. The first number is $151,075. If you recall, that was for a full year of salary and benefits. Staff wanted to present you what that full cost would be. That being said, the person started on January 1st, 14, so that will not be the full cost. We're still waiting on the final dollar figures, but it should be right in that range of $85,537. The last item I wanted to talk about today was contingency. As a reminder, when Mr. Friedline and Mr. Phelps presented the concept of contingency back in October, a lot of these items had not been properly scoped out. And so there was a significant risk of the cost being greater than what the initial ask was. And I touched on several of these items today. With the aquatics needs at both Frac and Rose Lane pools, there's a possibility at the adult center for any sort of structural issues, should council wish to use funding here for that. Also, should there be desire to use the funds here to build out the second floor. And then, as I touched on, expanding the cameras at other locations. I'm not asking for direction on the contingency today. I just wanted to inform you that these items are coming up. We do have the intent to come back in April. At that time, we should have much better information about all of these projects, in addition to learning more from Mr. Burke and his team about the community centers and the restrooms. And hopefully we can provide you some better information at that time. With that being said, is there any questions that council might have?
Go ahead, Jim.
Vice Mayor, if I could just add a point of clarity. James did mention the Saguaro Ranch entrance fence and the idea that we might be able to paint all the fencing in and of itself up to $75,000 estimate. Was looking for maybe a shake of heads, a consensus that we can move up, because we'd like to get that completed by the end of March.
Do we have consensus to move that up? Yes.
Yes, you do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Turner.
Don't do it too quickly now. Vice Mayor?
Yes.
I just compliments the staff for accomplishing all these tasks. Done a great job. Thank you.
Vice Mayor,
Yes, Councilmember.
James, excellent presentation. We don't get them consistently, but when we do, I think you should be recognized. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Thank you. Ms. Bowers, we introduce item 6.
Presentation on public safety personnel retirement system unfunded pension liabilities and pension obligation bonds.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, here to provide staff report on the last item on today's agenda. It'll be led today by Vicki Rios, our Assistant City Manager, and Lisette Camacho, who's our Director of Budget and Finance, and they'll be joined by Kurt Freud, of course we know is our Managing Director for RBC Capital.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, we're going to take a minute here for Mr. Freund to join us. He should be stepping in any minute. I did want to just preface this by saying we're very excited about this item. Mr. Freund is going to give you a lot of information. There are a lot of numbers here to look at, but I'd like council to kind of focus on one particular thing, and that is the concept that we're going to be talking to you about today. And what this concept boils down to, as Mr. Freund will explain, is basically replacing one type of expensive debt with another type of less expensive debt. So the concept, I think, is a little bit more important than the numbers, although we are going to go through those for you so that you have an understanding of it. And we also have planned in timing for another workshop if needed for council to debate or look at this a little bit more. But again, the concept is fairly simple. The idea would be to replace expensive debt with less expensive debt. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kurt. Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. Nice to see you all, or at least the ones that are up there right now. My name is Kurt Freund. As Ms. Rios said, happy to be with you today to talk about this issue. You have slide materials, I think, in front of you as well as on the screen, and so I'll just launch into those. I apologize on the front end that there are a bunch of numbers. That kind of comes with the turf for me, but we'll try to make them not too painful in the process. So I think all of the council members probably know this, that one of the big critical issues, financing issues that's facing cities and counties in the state is their pension liabilities and the level of unfunded pension liabilities. And that's particularly acute in the public safety personal retirement system. The state retirement system is funded at a bit higher level. It's a little bit different program. Public safety personal retirement system is a system that's a combined or centralized system, but individual cities and counties have individual plans within the system. Given its size, Glendale, as you maybe would suspect, has pretty significant unfunded liabilities, and you can see them on the slide here. So for the police plan, the unfunded liability is about $193.9 million, and for the fire personnel, it's about $95.8 million. It's important, I think, to note that that's not unique. The city's not unique by any means relative to this. In fact, on the fire front, you're funded in the mid-50s to high 50% level. That's actually pretty high. A lot of these plans are funded down in the 40% level. For police, you're down lower and closer to that level. And you can kind of see that put on the page as well, just overall what the funding levels are for PSPRS, or the Public Safety Personal Retirement System Plan. And you can see for the last 3 years, overall, it's run in that 45% level. So consistent with what I just said about the city by no means being unique. And I'll talk about why this came about so that you have a sense for that as well, because it's not really anything that the city did. It's just the nature of how the system's funded and has been funded. And so, as Ms. Rios said, we've developed with the staff an approach to basically take this debt obligation, this pension debt obligation that you have, and refinance it with debt that's issued directly by the city at a lower interest cost is really what the whole nut is here, and we'll talk about that more. Turning to the next slide, just spend a minute talking about what causes unfunded liabilities. So first, the unfunded liability is, if you think about a pension is benefits you pay out to employees over time. You take what those benefits are over time, you put them in today's dollars, and you compare that with the amount of money that you have on hand or assets on hand. And the difference between those numbers is what's the unfunded amount. So pretty simple concept. But there's a lot of different factors that can cause unfunded liabilities. One is when the actuaries run the numbers for a pension system, they assume a certain rate of return on the assets that you have. For public safety personal retirement system today, that return is 7.3%. So think about it, I have money in this pension plan. As an actuary, I'm going to assume that you earn 7.3% every year going out in time. I have liabilities that grow over time, and so how much money do I need to put aside? And I'll assume it grows at 7.3. But in reality, the money in the plan can earn anything. So sometimes it's lower than 7.3, sometimes it's higher than 7.3. That's what they think it is for the long haul over a 30-year actuarial period. And we'll talk about that. So if you come in with actual returns that are below that, you're going to create unfunded liabilities, less than full funding. If you change the benefits, if the benefits are higher than what the actuaries assume, then that's going to create unfunded liability. If pension benefits have cost of living adjustments, so the actuaries assume a certain level of adjustment. If the adjustments that are made are higher or lower, that'll affect your unfunded liability. So all these factors can affect it, and every year the actuaries go through a calculation to figure out how much you have to fund, whether it's Glendale or Tempe or Phoenix or whoever the public entity is. The most significant factors that caused the significant unfunded liability that we have with public safety personal retirement system. And again, this is not unique here. It's in existence across the country. A lot of public entities have this problem, in many cases much greater than we do in Arizona. But the biggest factor in Arizona was that the statutes previously provided for a permanent benefit increase if the investment return of the retirement system assets was above 9%. So if you earn 12% in a year, then they took 50% of the investment return above 90% and said, we'll apply that to a permanent benefit increase, and we'll just assume that it kind of pays for itself. It was a mistake, frankly, made by the actuaries, and it was a benefit built in the statute that was not supportable for the long haul. So that was the biggest factor that caused the unfunded liabilities. And then second, the Great Recession hit all pension plans pretty hard, and so that further contributed to it. You had an unfunded situation that was unfunded more because of investment returns over that roughly 3-year period in there. Many of you probably know that pension reforms were enacted a few years back in Prop 124 and 125. Importantly, they eliminated the permanent benefit increase for in statute, so that was a big change that was made. That's probably the most critical factor. They put a 2% annual cap on COLA increases or cost of living adjustments for the benefits. Both of those were helpful. There were other reforms that took place. New actuaries were brought in. That was very helpful, I think, to the system. They brought in new investment managers. They really retooled, and over the last really year and a half now, they've really completely replaced the staff. You've had some board membership changes as well there. And while all those reforms were good, you'll also probably recall that the court said, hey, look, you can't undo the employment contract you had with employees. So what ended up happening was a Tier 1 and Tier 2 employee groups, basically legacy employees, got created, whose benefits stayed the same, and then a Tier 3 was created that's kind of on a new path now. And so while pension reform was very important and very useful and will be helpful for the long haul, it didn't eliminate this unfunded balance, unfunded liability associated with Tier 1 and Tier 2 employees in the system. And that's what we'll really talk about. Another change that was made, and this was both good and bad, the pension system changed their actuarial assumption in terms of investment returns. It used to be 8.1%. It's gradually ratcheted down over time to now 7.3%. And so you're all knowledgeable people, pay attention to what's going on out there. If I said, hey, over the long haul, I'm going to assume you're earning 8.1%, you'd say, wow, that seems pretty high. There's the likelihood I'll come under that on a regular basis, and in fact, you probably would. And so they've brought it down. 7.3 seems to be okay. I might argue if I was budgeting and planning, I'd budget and plan for a lower investment return than that. But here's the bad side of lowering your investment return assumptions. If you lower that in your actuarial calculations, your unfunded liability goes up. So they look to have a balance there between the two. An important thing to note when you're talking about pension liabilities is this is debt to the city. The city is given a number every year, your annual required contribution. We'll talk about that. It's the amount of money that you have to pay into the pension system. The actuaries calculate it, you pay it. It's a debt to the city, and it's treated as a debt of the city by rating agencies, by investors, by creditors, et cetera. You don't not pay it. Now, there are jurisdictions around the country who choose not to pay it. The state of Illinois is a great example, and their pension liabilities have just gone up and up and up. But in Arizona, no public entity fails to pay its contributions. So it's like a debt, and that debt amortizes at that 7.3% investment return. So it's very costly debt. You've all sat around while we've issued bonds for the city, and you know that the borrowing cost to the city has been remarkably low compared to that, 2%, 3%, et cetera, depending upon market conditions. And so that's what sets up the opportunity here. you're going to take pension debt at 7.3 and issue debt directly at a far lower rate that we'll talk about. The other concept here, when you look at issuing debt directly versus the pension system debt, in the pension system, because the way the numbers are calculated and their percent of payroll, et cetera, your contributions to pay off your pension liability go up over time, and they go up significantly. And so you can see on the bottom of this page, for fiscal 21, your annual payment for the unfunded liability, just that portion of the pension, was $20.6 million. By fiscal 2037, it'll be $41 million. So it's a very steep curve that it's going up over time. And by issuing debt at a lower rate that you control, you can stabilize the payments so that they're more level payments over time. Far better for you from a budgetary standpoint. If we go to this next slide then, just to get into some of the numbers, and we won't look at all of these, but it'll give you some sense for it. So this shows you what is in existence right now. This is what the pension system, public safety personal retirement system says. Here's what Glendale has to pay based on your unfunded liability and the cost of the pension system right now. And it's broken into contributions for police, because that's one plan that you have, versus fire, which is a second plan that you have. And when you look at pension payments that you make, they fall into two categories. One is called normal cost, and that's just the cost that's required to be paid to keep current with the benefits that are being provided, given the number of employees you have, given the assumed mortality rate of people, how long they'll be retired, payroll changes, et cetera, a whole bunch of assumptions. And so those normal costs are just, that's what it costs to take care of your pension. The UAL cost, or unfunded accrued liability costs, is paying off the unfunded liability. So it's like a mortgage payment or a debt payment. It's the amount that you'll pay each year for police under the UAL costs, or fire under the UAL costs, to pay off the dollar amount of unfunded liability that we shared on the first slide. It's paid off between now and 2038, and it's basically accruing at 7.3%. And then you can see what the totals are. That's the column that we'll look to tackle. So, you know, it's pretty simple, just if you think about it. If I said, hey, those are at 7.3%, I can replace them with payments at 2.5%, you'd all immediately raise your hand and go, well, of course I'd do that. That's pretty straightforward. That is a large part of what goes on here. So this alternative approach, we talk a little bit on page 5, and it involves the issuance of taxable debt obligations by the city. They're taxable debt as opposed to tax-exempt debt, because under the federal tax code, you can borrow for capital projects on a tax-exempt basis, but you can't borrow for, in effect, operating costs. This is an operating cost. It's a payment into your pension system, obviously, but it's not a capital purpose, so it has to be a taxable debt obligation. The nice thing about that right now is taxable interest rates, like tax-exempt interest rates, are very low. At the time I put this together, you know, the borrowing costs would probably be in the 2.25% range. I ran the numbers in here at 2.45%, just to be a bit more conservative. But compare that to 7.3%. Again, that's half of the juice, if you will, in this idea. The obligation proceeds, so you borrow the money, you take the proceeds, you dump them into the pension system with PSPRS. PSPRS runs an investment portfolio and an investment program that takes all of the assets from all the jurisdictions and invests them in a big, gigantic portfolio, and then their earnings are distributed back out to the individual plan. So each individual plan doesn't have its own portfolio. It's part of a bigger portfolio. And so they invested. And as long as the investment return that you're earning is greater than your borrowing cost, then you will be cash flow positive relative to doing this. And so part of what you have to assess, and it's the second big element on this, is do you think that the public safety personal retirement system will earn more than, let's say, 2.5% borrowing cost over the life cycle of this borrowing, which is about 16 years? History has shown that, yes, they would. You'll see I've run numbers at 7.3%. I've run numbers at lower rates as well. And you can see what impact that has. But that's, in a nutshell, you know, the one thing you'd take away is I have pension debt at 7.3. I replace it with debt at 2.5. I invest the money as long as I earn more than 2.5. I win. I do better. The higher I am above that level, the better I do. And the numbers are pretty strong, as you'll see. Let's see, going to the next page then, just to look at those numbers to give you some sense for it. This page tries to summarize that for you. So the first column, the existing UAAL contributions, that's what you're doing right now. That's the page we looked at the other day. This first page is for the police plan. So those are the payments to amortize the unfunded liability right now, doing nothing. The next column then is an estimated revised unfunded liability contribution. In this model, talking with the manager and city staff, we fund it at a level that gets you to an 85% funded level. So for police right now, you're at 41%. So this would take you up to 85%. We didn't go to 100%. Some cities in Arizona are in fact doing that. Me personally, I don't like the idea of being overfunded. I think being close to funded is the sweet spot, quite frankly, and so these numbers we ran at 85%. So that leaves a little bit of unfunded liability that you're still having to amortize, and it's reflected in that column. That's why those numbers go down, but they still exist. If you did 100%, that column would be 0. Okay, just so people are following along on that front. The next column then shows the estimated debt service for the debt that would be issued to fund up to the 85% level. And you can see that that's a much flatter, much more stable budgetary level, right? It doesn't go up big chunk at the tail end or over time. And then the next column is the estimated total of what the cost would be if you did this. And then finally, in the last column, the estimated savings is the delta between doing nothing or doing this proposal. And you can see, you know, the dollar amount of savings over time adds up to about $75 million over a 16-year period. Now, that's assuming that the money that's put in the pension system for the police plan, which is what we're talking about here, is invested at 7.3%, the actuarial assumption. So we'll come back to that in a second. So this page is for police. The next slide is for the fire plan. Fire doesn't have as big as an unfunded liability. It's not as big a plan, right? So it's about half the size of the police plan. You get the sense, the numbers, same sort of drill. In this case, over that 16-year period, you're saving about 33, 34 million, okay? Estimated basis. And then the next page following that is combining the two, so the city council has a feel for it. So overall, if you earn 7.3 and you borrowed at 2.45%, as shown in here, you'd save about 108.7 million over 16 years. Certainly a very sizable number, and that's why this concept, a lot of cities, both here in Arizona and counties, as well as across the country, are doing these financings right now because interest rates are so low. It sets up the opportunity for it to work. Now, as I mentioned, 7.3% is, you know, if you talk to the investment managers at PSPRS, you talk to a lot of investment people, they'd say that's not a bad number. Me personally, I live on the conservative side of the freeway. And so I think you should, as a public entity, always kind of be more conservative when you think about these things. And if they work, great. If they work better in reality, super. But it's the downside you got to watch for. So we ran this at an assumed 6% rate. PSPRS's return over the last 10 years has been in the 6.5% rate overall. So below that level, and you could run it down to whatever level you want. This is on the combined police and fire, just for comparative purposes. The columns are all the same, except your savings are lower. So your savings here are 89.1 million versus on a combined basis when we ran it at 7.3%, they were 108.7. So still very significant level of savings, but significantly lower too. If the earnings rate is higher than 7.3, great. If it's lower, you know, the lower you get. If you bring it down to a 2.5% investment return, then it's kind of a wash. Okay? Everybody following that?
Vice Mayor? A
Councilmember
question, if I
Turner.
could. Can you explain why in each of these examples, the savings in fiscal year 2022 is significantly more than it is in any of the other years?
Great, that's a great question. It is because I designed it that way, but I'll tell you why. You could design it any way you want, right? The reason I did it that way is because one of the things when you go down this path that I think is important to do from the city standpoint, but also from a rating agency standpoint, is to take some of the savings in the early years and put it aside in a reserve at the city level. Why? Well, every year the actuaries calculate what the liability is of the pension system, right? I can guarantee you unequivocally, 100%, that all of the numbers that actually happen won't align with what the assumptions are in there. So you're going to have changes. So you could fund this system at 100%. You could totally fund it at 100%, and I guarantee you that at some point you'll have unfunded liability again. The return every year is not going to be 7.3% or greater. Some years it's going to be lower. People are going to live longer than the mortality tables that the actuaries assume. You're going to give bigger, payroll increases. Any number of factors, there's a whole slew of them, could change that. And so part of the concept is fund it up to 85%, create a little reserve cushion so that a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the road, when the numbers don't align, you have a pot of money that you can dump in to solve the problem like that, as opposed to having that unfunded liability build up over time.
Vice Mayor, so then that pot of money.
Yes, sir. Your pot of money.
Obviously not a literal pot of money.
Yes, sir.
It is it's over and above our reserve fund in the general fund, and it's allocated.
Yes.
As a, in essence, like almost an escrow account or whatever. It's sitting there somewhere.
It would be a reserve account solely for retirement purposes, so not generally available, that you'd put aside. What a lot of the cities out there are doing is they're actually borrowing money to put into a reserve, which you could do. I personally favor taking some of your savings and doing that, so you borrow less. But you could do either way. But doing it is an important issue from, like I said, a credit rating standpoint, but also from a budgetary standpoint for the city.
And Vice Mayor, if I could continue, that then reserve fund, we'll call it, instead of a pot of money, with
a better word, yeah,
our reserve, is that fund then protected solely by the will of the council, or is it protected under federal law or some other means?
Well, it wouldn't be protected under federal law. I know Ms. Rios wants to speak to this, but I think you'd set it up as a fund, a restricted fund at the city level. But go ahead.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, that's correct. It would be set up as part of the borrowing to put that, in reserve, and it would be some type of action by the council, and then it would take some type of action by the council to use it in the future. So if we were using it, there would either be rules associated with it, or we would require a council action to then unreserve it or use it for a purpose.
And if I may, Vice Mayor, so the rules regarding its use would be established by this council?
Vice Mayor, members of the council, that's correct.
Such that we could, in essence, at least restrict this council and future councils from tapping into that fund without notifying the members of our employees and retirees to whom we intended that fund to benefit?
Vice Mayor, if I understand the question, again, it would take a council action. So yes, there'd be public notification and all of those types of things if it were going to be used for any purpose.
The Vice Mayor, Ms. Rios, with all due respect to present, past, and future councils and management and all, it's not always as transparent perhaps as we would want it to be. So, but again, that's up to this council to, if we feel we need to safeguard this money through the rules that we set up, that's up to us to do it. And of course, the members of our police and fire and the retirees out there would have an interest probably in discussing that with us and making sure that we get it done as right as possible to start with. Personally, I think it would be a shame if at some point down the road it was discovered that even though it was all publicly noticed, it maybe slipped through without awareness. Thank you.
Welcome. Go ahead, Councilmember Malner.
I just had a question regarding that. I mean, I get the point of safeguarding our retirement fund. Part of this action is to save, if the numbers were to work out on the 6%, for example, that at the end of, what is that, 20 years, that we would have $89 million in this fund. So, I mean, I'm talking in savings.
Mayor, members
Yeah,
of the
see, and that's
council.
what I don't quite understand is,
Okay.
are we putting that all into a fund?
No, Mayor, members of the council, don't misunderstand what we're saying. We're saying you would take a portion of your savings and set it aside, probably up to some dollar limit, and Mr. Freund would certainly advise us as to what that would be. And once you reach that dollar limit, and we'll just make up a number and say it's $15 million that you decide to set aside in reserves, then you don't continue. It's not all of your savings. It's just some portion that you design or that you designate. Again, we would use Kurt's advice on that matter. And then and it could take a year to get there because you could set it all aside at once. As Mr. Freund said, some cities are borrowing and setting it aside. We don't see in our case the need to do that, but you could set aside, and I'll just make up an idea and say you could set aside half your savings every year for 5 years until you reach some dollar amount, and then it would just be there. And again, it's meant to be there for fluctuations up or down in that unfunded liability in the future. So it's specifically for that use, and council would designate either the rules under which it would be used or some mechanism for it to then take a public action to use it to send it back to the retirement system at that time.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yes, Blake.
Okay.
Mr. Vice Mayor, members of the council, just to add to that, just so that it's clear. So right now, you're making your pension payments out of the general fund. So the way I think about this is you're reducing the amount of money you spend out of the general fund to support pensions. And to the extent you can do that, that's great. And then, as Ms. Rios just said, part of what you're doing then is you're taking part of that, as opposed to borrowing money and putting it aside as a reserve. You're taking part of the savings and putting it in a reserve because you know you're going to have changes in the numbers over time. Does that help?
Vice Mayor?
Member Turner?
It not only perhaps as a hedge against fluctuations in returns, but it also could help supplement that 15%. The 80, we're only borrowing to fund at 85, but it could also be that 15%. We could be growing that.
Sure, you could apply it in that way, but that would be the thought. Ideally, you'd use it as a buffer. Think about where you're at right now. You're 41% funded in the police plan. You're going to take it up to 85%. The goal, or the hope, the idea, the financing structure you'd create would be to avoid going back to 41. If you capture it early, your ability to avoid that is increased. And so that's kind of the concept. It's like, hey, we're going to get to 85. let's try to hang pretty close there. If you take it to the 100% level and you said, I have no unfunded liability, I'm fully funded, you know, maybe that's an easier way to think about it. You kind of go, okay, well, if I get underfunded, I'm going to take the money in my reserve, get me back to 100%. So it's that kind of concept. Okay?
Vice Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Clark?
I think this is a brilliant idea. Whoever figured it out is
Was
one
Miss Rio.
smart dude. Really, very good, very, very good. I just have one question, and there's no page numbers. It's under the slide entitled City Financing Options for Funding Pensions.
Yes.
And it would be the second bullet, excise tax revenue obligations / pledged revenue obligations. There's a remark there's generally not used by cities as it uses excise tax debt capacity. In other words, sales tax capacity. What is the downside to our general fund of using this sales tax capacity for this purpose?
Oh, great. Vice Mayor, Councilmember Clark, why don't we go to this slide and I'll answer that question
Very
and going
good.
through it, if that works okay. So we get the concept. So then the question is, well, how do you borrow the money, you know, if you're the city? And there's really three legal options available. One, the one we were just mentioning, is excise tax revenue obligations. The city should, council members should be familiar with this. You go out and issue excise tax obligations. They're secured by city sales taxes and state shared sales taxes and income taxes. You've issued it for arena debt, other sports facilities, other things of the city. Couple things in that regard, in answer to the councilwoman's question. You only have so much capacity there, right? And we've looked at that recently. This financing concept, given the level of unfunded liability and funding at 85%, would involve issuing about $225 million of debt. More debt than you have capacity to issue for against your excise taxes. So it doesn't work so well. The other thing that happens, even if the numbers did work, it crowds out your ability to use that for other purposes. So, you know, if you decide, you know, you want to make improvements to City Hall, and you don't want to issue general obligation bonds that the voters have to authorize that affects the property tax, you might say, oh, I'll go out and issue sales tax debt, excise tax obligations. So doing the pension financing doesn't allow you to do that. Excise tax bonds have a legal covenant that compares the historical amount of sales taxes to the maximum amount of annual debt service payments, and so there's a limit on them. Okay? Does that answer that question? Does that help in that regard?
It sure does.
So
Let me just follow up. So these would be our three options in terms of financing this. And based upon your comments, that scratches number one option.
Number one does not work very well
Yeah.
to fund it up to 85%, and it uses your debt capacity in that area. It is not what I'd recommend for you. It's not what any city in Arizona has done to date. Skip to the bottom one on the page, general obligation bonds. You all know what those are, right?
Mhm.
They're secured by and payable from property taxes. They require voter authorization. Perfectly fine mechanism, but no city has gone to their voters and asked to issue GO bonds. Obviously, you couldn't do that in the short term because you'd have to go out for a vote. Generally speaking, you know, most councils have not wanted to go that way, but you know what that's about. The middle one, certificates of participation, is the one that I'd recommend to you given the time frame, and it's the one that all cities that have done this and all cities that are considering doing this are using. And we'll talk about it in length. Certificates of participation are paid for out of your general fund, and it's a pretty simple concept if I say it to you, and then we'll go through it in more detail. But basically, you take physical assets, property assets that you have, and you leverage them to borrow money. It's like a home equity loan, except you don't give up your house. In this case, your assets. You only ground lease them out. And it's a very common financing approach used by cities and counties and state government, not only here, but across the country. You know, like I say, it leverages your assets. And so that's the one that I would focus on. The source of payment for your pension debt is general fund. Source of payment for this debt would be general fund. Kind of matches off well. And so if we go to the next page, I can talk about that in a little bit more detail. Like I said, it's a common approach. It leverages existing facilities of the city. So what you would do is you'd go out and look at the assets that the city has, and you'd look for assets that don't have a lien on them, i.e. don't have debt on them, and aren't utility related, because utility related properties support utility bonds that you've issued. So think of the wastewater system as an example. You wouldn't take a wastewater plant and use it for this because the money from running the wastewater plant pays your wastewater revenue bonds. And so you'd look at a building like this building and you'd say, hey, it's worth $15 million or whatever it's worth. I'm going to ground lease it out for the term of the financing, 16 years. I'm going to lease purchase it back all in one fell swoop. When I ground lease it out, I ground lease it out to a bank trustee, the trustee for the transaction. And they have a ground lease. They don't have ownership in it. You retain ownership. You use the facilities, et cetera. What that does is it allows you to borrow money against the asset value of those facilities. You make the lease payments out of your general fund, and at the end of the financing term, the property just reverts to you. The ground lease cancels, property is yours, free and clear, you don't owe anything. And so when you do this, it doesn't feel any different. I mean, they're still your buildings, you still maintain them, you still insure them, you still do everything relative because you still own them. You've just ground leased them out. If you don't pay the lease payment, the trustee takes the building and for the duration of the ground lease can lease it to someone else. And so when these financings are done, investors, the last thing an investor wants to do is be a landlord. They don't want your convention center. They don't want your library. They don't want any of that stuff. They just want you to make the annual payment. And so if you think about it, right now you make your annual payment for your pension system, right? We don't not make our payments. Same is true with the lease purchase. You don't not make the payment. If you actually said, oh, I think I won't make the payment, you could never borrow the money because no one wants to be the landlord. So you take what are essential facilities and you ground lease those out and you lease them back and then people go, oh yeah, they're gonna pay this and it works fine. Their lease purchase financings, these certificates of participation, they look like bonds, they're debt instruments. And they're highly rated. So generally speaking, they're rated one notch, one category below what a general obligation bond would be rated. General obligation bond is your highest credit because it's secured by an unlimited property tax. So they end up getting high ratings. Because they get high ratings, they have low interest rates, and it's the financing structure that works.
Vice Mayor?
Questions about that?
I just want to make sure I understand. In essence, what you're suggesting is we substitute the annual PSPR payment with making a ground lease payment instead. And theoretically, that ground lease payment is cheaper or lower than what the PSPR payment is. Correct. Is that it in a nutshell?
It's in a nutshell. One correction, it's not the ground lease payment you're making. You're ground leasing it out and you're leasing it back. So it's a lease payment, but same concept.
Payment,
Exactly right.
Okay,
and so just to crystallize on that, because it's important, I think, from your standpoint, for sure you'll borrow at a lower cost. It'll be a lot lower. 2.5 versus 730, that's easy. The other piece is what you invest at. You don't control the investment. Public safety personal retirement system controls it. So you got to get comfortable with that side of it. I'm comfortable. I think your staff is comfortable. But you know, it's important to kind of understand that. But that's how it works. Next page, just real quickly, and then I'll wrap up here for you. This page just gives you a sense. Lots of people are doing these. We're working with a bunch of cities and counties in Arizona. All of them are kind of going, yeah, this is a good opportunity, a good time to do this. My colleagues across the country, because we're a national firm, are doing a lot of these as well. You know, if you think about it, if interest rates are higher, it still works, but it doesn't work as comfortably, right? Because, again, same thing happens. If I borrow at 5%, but I earn 7.3, I'm ahead of the game. But you don't feel as comfortable that you'll be at 7.3 when you've borrowed at 5. The delta between 2.5 and 7.3, or whatever the return is broader. That's why it makes it a popular idea right now. And then lastly, steps in the process. If the council decides to go forward, I thought it'd be good to summarize this. So if you decide to go forward, one of the things that has to happen is the staff has to identify the properties that you'd ground lease out and lease back. From the city council standpoint, you shouldn't care what those are. What they would go through is they'd say, hey, let's find properties. And I've said, if we find properties worth, from an insurance standpoint, worth 50% of the amount of debt we're borrowing, then that'll work. You might think, well, Kurt, how could that be? You know, like if we don't pay and we're only leveraging at 50% value, the investors will come up short. Gets back to what I said earlier. The investors don't want your property. They just expect you to pay. You're a governmental entity. You pay your debts. You're doing this for a reason, just like you pay your pension debt. So that's why you can do that. They'll do that, and that would be fine. You know, we can report back on that at some point. If, in fact, it's helpful to the council to have an additional work study session after you absorb this and go home and say, God, that guy talked about numbers for a long time, you know, there's room on the schedule to do that. The thought would be to come to the council at its March 30th meeting, if you decide to do this, adopt a resolution that authorizes going forward with a financing at a not-to-exceed dollar amount. We'd meet with rating agencies, staff, and myself toward the end of April, sell the certificates or the debt obligations in early June and close toward the end of June, so that come the beginning of July, you'd have the money to deposit with Public Safety Personal Retirement System and get after it. Importantly, the other thing that would need to happen is you need to budget for making that payment of $225, $250 million, whatever the dollar amount is that equates to the numbers, in your budget for next year, so that you all have provided authorization to spend the money from the proceeds. With that, I think that's the last thing I wanted to say.
Councilmember Tomacha?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Thank you, Kurt. Very thorough presentation. Who dictates the lease terms then? How do you structure that part of it?
It's a great question. The lease purchase, the structure of the lease purchase is pretty boilerplate. So it's designed, you're not negotiating with like a landlord or anything like that. So you take your properties. Let's say we take this building. We ground lease it to a bank trustee. The bank trustee is just a bank serving in a trustee capacity who gets the lease payments from you and makes the payments out to the investors, okay? The investors are like those people in the bond market. And so we go out, you know, through underwriting firms, we go out and we sell in $5,000 denominations or up. We go out and sell their right to get a portion of the lease payments, okay? They don't want the land. So what the lease purchase agreement says is, hey, the city's lease purchasing this property that it ground leased out to the trustee. It's making semi-annual lease payments. You're responsible for insurance. You're responsible for maintaining the building. You have ownership of the building. And so there's nothing in it from the city standpoint where you go, oh, I don't like that. You're not negotiating with anyone. We're writing the terms of what the lease purchase says. Happy to share it with you all, but it's really a pretty boilerplate type document.
I'm just, that's You don't need to do that. I'm just
No, no.
curious. I'm just
But does
always
that-
curious
does
about
that help?
details.
That
It does,
help?
but well, how do you determine value?
What we do is we take the replacement value of the properties that your staff calculates for your audit for insurance purposes. So you do that on an annual basis as part of your financial statements, as other jurisdictions do. And we take that again, recognizing that the value of the property isn't hypercritical. We're going to do 50%. So by definition, if you don't make the lease payment, the trustee is going to have buildings that are only worth 50%, and they can't sell them. They can only lease them out to some other use, right? So it's really not designed to ever be taken in that way, and that's kind of what makes it work. So the investors don't look at the property and go, geez, I wonder what I could use the convention center for if I had to lease it. They go, are these essential facilities for the city of Glendale, and will the city make its annual lease payments on that basis, given the credit quality of the city, et cetera, et cetera? And if they say yes, which they would, then they're fine.
One last question, if I could, Vice Mayor. Well, one statement first. I thought our unfunded liability was around $260 million, so I was a little surprised to find out that it's closer to $290 million based on those numbers. So that's a little more alarming than I thought it was. But I just wanted to ask, what is the appetite in the market for this type of investment vehicle? I mean, it's the rates are low. These are taxable. So just curious what the appetite in the market is for this type of a vehicle.
Again, a very good question. It's been very strong, particularly in the short term. That's why interest rates are so low. Short term being the last 6 months in particular, but even going back the last couple of years. And so, if you think about it, a governmental entity, most governmental entities are very good credits, right? Your financials are very good. Your likelihood to pay is very high. Municipal governments generally don't default on their debt. And so there's a huge appetite for municipal debt. And the taxable market is a gigantic market. So all of the issues that have been sold have way more investor interest than obligations available to sell.
I'm sorry, I do have one more question, Vice Mayor, if I could. Because of the debt, does it affect our rating?
Well, the goal would be no. So again, if you think about it, you're swapping pension debt that rating agencies, when they write up your credit report and they look at your credit, they say, how much debt do you have in your pension? And how much OPEB, other post-employment benefit debt do you have? And you calculate that as part of your financial statements, so it's reported in your financial statements. So they basically look at it and go, if you have a good plan, and that's where this reserve comes into play, and you're swapping this debt for pension debt, like you're at the same sort of spot. Now, you got to be smart about the debt you're issuing. That's why I say we're not going to issue excise tax obligations. You need to put a reserve aside, things like that they like. But generally speaking, doing this has been viewed as neutral or positive by the rating agencies.
All right, very good, thank you.
Councilmember Malnard?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Just one question. It seems to me that if many cities in the state of Arizona went to this process, that it would reduce the pressure on the fund administrators that administer this large fund to perform. Can you address that?
Well, yeah, I can. I'm not sure if I have a perfect answer. This is my take on it. My take would be that I think the changes that the public safety personal retirement system has made are beneficial. I think the new team from the management to the investment managers is all positive, right? I think, quite frankly, it was not managed particularly well, and I don't think that that's a big secret. In the past, they had problems. That's why it's funded at a lower level than, as an example, the state retirement system. All that said, no guarantees. You know, like, do I think that the investment yields will go up and down? Yes. Do I think it's a reasonable proposition that they'll earn more than your borrowing rate? Definitively. Can I guarantee it? I can't. So that's kind of how I look at it. I wouldn't be here talking to you about it, though, today if I thought it was a bad idea and not how I live, you know. And so I've looked at it quite a bit. You know, I like a lot of the things that they have going on. I think that it's a huge amount of money that the city could save. There are very few things that the city will look at that will have the potential to save this kind of money for you. And so on that basis, I think it's something that you should definitely strongly consider. You know, this the way I look at it. I don't know if that's fully responsive, but
In part, yes, yes. Do you have more of an answer?
Vicki, did you want to speak? Or?
Yes, actually, I kind of wanted to kind of summarize and get us where I'd like us to be if we could. But we are looking for some direction and some consensus of the council today to move forward with this. And we're prepared. We've already begun many of the steps, including having Mr. Freund do the analysis for us and getting the properties so we can start identifying which properties could be used as collateral. We have also, in addition to that, the staff has met with the staff at PSPRS. In theory, again, talking to them about if they were to receive this large dollar amount somewhere around the time frame of July 1st or shortly thereafter, would they be ready? How would they invest it? Would they be willing to continue to talk to us throughout the process and be open to us and to us talking to them about their investment strategies and that type of thing? And so we did meet with them. We do feel comfortable that they aren't going to shift their investment strategy for some reason and take the pressure off themselves to perform. So we've anticipated some of that. I don't know if that helps answer your question, but we believe that we'll stay on top of them, and there are a lot of cities doing this that also have that expectation. So if council is amenable to it and agreeable and kind of has a consensus, we're prepared to continue to work with Kurt's staff and the staff at Greenberg Traurig to prepare an ordinance for council to put this into the budget for next year and to go ahead with the sale. As Mr. Freund said, and credited me with the brilliant idea of doing it, which I appreciate very much, there are very few opportunities that we will have or that I will have in my lifetime to save this much money for a city. It is very impactful. We feel very strongly that it is a good move on the city's part, and with that, I'll let the council make their consensus.
Any questions or comments from the council? Councilmember Turner?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. At what point will management and council discuss specific properties we might be considering?
Mayor, members of council, or Vice Mayor, if that's something council would like to see once we've identified them, we can certainly send you out a list. As Mr. Freund mentioned, it's kind of a formality of the way that it works, and so it's not that impactful as to which buildings they are. But if that's important to the council, we can certainly get you that information once we've got them all identified.
Vice Mayor, thank you, Ms. Rios. As I think was mentioned, they need to be mission critical properties, and I also think that there's a public and PR component to this that it needs to be thoroughly explained, or at least an explanation needs to be thoroughly available so that the public has confidence. I've seen other political entities enter into these certificates of participation, and it generally does raise questions in the public. So we need to, be sure that we're confident in what we're doing, and that we can, that we can build public confidence in it as well. So I would be interested in seeing the proposals and having a conversation about that.
Vice Mayor and Council, once you said that, I remembered too that because there are ground leases involved, that those will all be publicly disclosed and they'll all need to be part of that final package when it comes forward. And just for the council, this is something that, again, if we decide to go forward, we will work with our public relations PIO office to get information out to the public about it so that everyone understands and we are transparent about what we're doing and the benefits to the city of Glendale.
Thank you. Councilmember Tomachoff.
Vice Mayor, so I guess by giving consensus, would we be giving consensus to come back to a March 23rd workshop to have a final discussion before we actually move forward with it? One of the things is that there's 2 people missing from today's meeting, so really only need 3 for a consensus. So I'm just curious. I'd like to have one more discussion before we actually move forward with it.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, that's entirely up to the council to tell us if they'd like to have another meeting or not. We put it into the schedule. It's up to you if you're ready to move forward or not.
Okay, Councilmember Clark.
Again, this is a very good idea. I understand the mechanics. I don't think it's necessary other than informationally letting us know what properties are included. I don't think it needs further discussion other than bringing back to us the relevant resolutions and actions to be taken. I think this is the germane meeting where we decide whether the concept is viable, and if so, move forward and let staff work it out. Thank you, Vice.
Thank you. Doug, do you want to speak or go ahead?
Yes, please. Thank you, Vice Mayor. I agree with Councilmember Turner on this. I think we need to move forward. I support the concept of moving forward, but I would like to see some detail on both the property. And again, I know it's germane, but it's going to be a PR thing for me. And I would like to make sure that our PR is in place. That's the most important to me because I know how some of the citizens in my district will react. And I want to make sure that we have the right message out there and that I can convey the correct message as to what we're doing and why.
Okay, thank you. Do I have consensus to move forward? There you have it.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is the city manager's report. Mr. Phelps, is there anything
Vice
from your
Mayor,
office?
Pardon me?
Is there anything else?
Yes. Got a couple of just items to brief the council on real quickly.
You.
I'll try to be quick. It's been a long day. Just want to alert you to something. Last week, Luke Air Force Base began to send letters to residents and customers who receive drinking water just east of the Air Force Base from Valley Utilities Water Company. And the letter informed them that at least one of their samples exceeded an EPA health advisory limit and that there was a potential contaminant in the water. And so the base now has begun delivering bottled water to these customers. I want to be clear first, none of these are Glendale water customers, even though they may have a Glendale address. It's only an assigned address, but they do reside in unincorporated city of Glendale. And so you may be getting questions from your constituents about that. Our water samples are continually monitored. We actually post our water reports online where the citizens can go and get updated. So if you have any questions, Craig Johnson and his team will put together a more detailed report to be coming to you. But just want to make sure you're aware that this is not a Glendale water supply issue. From Jordan Sparks and Marty Robbins, we now have another celebrity that hails from the city of Glendale. And for those of you who follow NASCAR, Michael McDowell, who is born and raised here in Glendale along with his wife, One of the most storied racing events in all of racing, which is the Daytona 500. And so we're very excited for him. The mayor was able to reach out to him and talk to him and congratulate him on behalf of you and the city of Glendale. And we're working on some ways when he'll be here in March for the NASCAR race here, and we're going to try to find some ways to acknowledge him in the community. There'll be more to be following on that. Quick economic update. A couple of you were able to go to the Brooklyn bedding ribbon cutting. As you know, they're getting ready to break ground on a new 650,000 square foot headquarters and manufacturing facility here in Glendale. It's in the Ocotillo district, which is in an area that's been long time an area for manufacture industrial, but not a lot of redevelopment or new projects as of late. So this is really exciting, I think, for this area. They will add approximately up to 250 new jobs here in the area. And so this is a great project. And again, our team helped put that together and to make that come about. Portillo's, which is a very famous Chicago area restaurant, is coming to Glendale. And our econ development team has been supporting their hiring efforts as they get ramped up. They are planning on opening in April of this year. Their location will be between around 79th and Bell in the Arrowhead Mall area. And so we're excited about this. This kind of follows the most recent opening of the Barrio Queen, which will be opening in late '21. Also, we are excited that the Land Rover Jaguar officially opened on Friday of last week. So that follows, of course, the opening of Volvo in December of last year, and then in 2018 of the BMW. In talking to the operator, they had a very good first weekend, that sales have been robust, and there seems to be a lot of excitement for those new agencies. And with that, Mr. Vice Mayor, that concludes my report.
Thank you. Our next item is the city attorney's report. Mr. Gruber?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. No report at this time.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is council items of special interest. Each council member will have the opportunity to indicate topics they would like to have discussed by the council at a future workshop. Councilmember Clark?
Nothing at this time, Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Malnar?
Nothing today, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Tomachoff?
Mayor, I do have one item today. I was thinking, with COVID and with the, us talking about our budget and employees, and I'm wondering what's happening with the employee leave bank, because I'm sure there were a lot of employees that didn't take their vacation, and it probably only affects people who've already accumulated the 400 hours. But I'd like to have a discussion about, how we are addressing employees who there's really no reason. I don't think any of us probably went on vacations this past year, and if we're going to, need to establish some sort of policy or something to. It's kind of an anomaly this year with employee vacations, and if we wanted to have a discussion about what we're going to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Turner?
Nothing today, Vice Mayor.
I have nothing. Do I have a motion to go into executive session?
So move.
They have a motion by Councilmember Turner, second by Councilmember Tomachoff. Any other discussions? All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Going to exec session.